Sometimes I find that perhaps in the same center. Even like you're with a score me, like you know. Flush it out later.
Yes, you're also.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I will call this meeting to order and begin by acknowledging with gratitude that we live and work on the traditional unceded territory of the Squamish, whose people have been stewards of these lands and waters surrounding Nitlalohem, Bowen Island. Welcome to the Bowen Island Municipality meeting of Monday, February 23rd, 2026, and thank you for joining. I'm Andrew Leonard, the Mayor of Bowen Island Municipality and the chair of this meeting. I'd like to introduce, as I always do, the other elected members of Bowen Island's Council here this afternoon. Starting on my far right, we have Councillor Island's trustee Sue Ellen Fast. To her left is Councillor Island's trustee Judy Getty. To my far left is Councillor John Saunders. To his right is Councillor Tim Wake. And to his right is Councillor Allison Morse. We are also joined online today by Councillor Alex Jurgensen. We're also joined by several members of our professional staff team here this afternoon, including our Chief Administrative Officer, Kieran Dillon, our Corporate Officer, Sophie Singha, as well as other members of our professional staff team who will be presenting agenda items here this afternoon. This meeting is being recorded, and when members of the public speak during the public comment and question and answer portion of the meeting, their presence and voice will be included in the permanent recording, which will be available at bowenislandmunicipality.ca and is currently streaming on our YouTube channel to the masses, where it will be available post there as well. This council meeting is an official forum for the conducting of business of local government. We all love our community. We are all passionate about what happens here. I would encourage everyone to maintain a constructive and respectful tone during the meeting and to direct public comments and questions and answers during those portions of the meeting to myself. For those following along, either in person, online, or later on in posterity, the agenda and full council package for this afternoon's meeting is available at bowenislandmunicipality.ca, including all of the attached reports and staff reports. And with that, I will look to the corporate officer for the introduction of any late items here this afternoon.
There are two on-table items, and there are letters that were received over the weekend regarding the Islands Trust, and that is from Ronald Wright and Bob Pascal.
And with that, I will look for a motion to approve the agenda and the on-table items for this afternoon's meeting, moved by Councillor Saunders, seconded by Councillor Wake. Any discussions, changes, amendments? Not seeing any, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
That carries unanimously. Moving on to public comments, I'll look to our corporate officer for the introduction of any public comments here this afternoon.
There are no public comments.
Okay, no public comments. Moving on to, yes.
Some sort of feedback. Hissing noise.
No, it's the fan in his computer.
Okay, moving along with the agenda, we have section 3 delegations, 3.1, Reuben Bronny, Chief Administrative Officer, and Julia Mobbs, the Director of Financial Services from the Islands Trust regarding Bowen Island's tax requisition. I can see you both online. Thank you for being here this afternoon. And welcome. I'll hand it over to the
I guess before CEO Bronny jumps in, it's Laura Patrick. I'm the chair of Trust Council, and I just wanted to introduce our staff that are invited here today. So I want to thank you, Mayor Leonard, and Council for the invitation. You say that public institutions across the province are operating at the intersection of fiscal constraint and governance complexity and high community expectations. The Islands Trust is no exception. In fact, as a unique form of governance that exists nowhere else in the world, our very structure reflects the ecological significance and broad public interest in this geographic region known as the Trust area. We also acknowledge that this area lies within territories of profound and enduring importance to many Coast Salish First Nations. Our cross-pollinated councils share a common goal: to lead organizations our staff are proud to serve and to make decisions that meaningfully advance the well-being of our island communities and the environment that we're mandated to preserve and protect. We're here today not simply as invited guests, but as partners in fulfilling that mandate. Our staff have a long and constructive history of working cooperatively and professionally. Mayor Leonard, you have said that the work should be approached as partners, not adversaries. I agree. At the same time, I must be clear that public criticism of the Islands Trust staff, particularly when they have acted appropriately in good faith within the policies and direction provided to them, is concerning. Our staff are dedicated public servants. They carry out the decisions of the Trust Council with professionalism and integrity. Healthy governance includes revisiting policies, formulas, and protocols from time to time. That's normal, it's constructive, and it will strengthen our partnership, provided we ground these conversations in mutual respect and shared commitment to facts. With that, I want to turn the floor over to CAO Brony and Director Mobbs, both of whom have the full confidence of Trust Council and my unequivocal respect for their leadership and professionalism.
Thank you. And just a moment, Chair Patrick, I wanted to acknowledge you just because we didn't have your name on the agenda, but I did want to formally welcome you and just state that I very much appreciate that framing. I think it's important to note. I think as local government bodies and municipal officials, we are certainly on the receiving end of a variety of criticism, particularly as it relates to tax dollars, how those tax dollars come in and how they flow. And the conversation of value, or is the trust worth it, or have staff acted appropriately, this is not that conversation. So we've invited you here in the spirit of partnership, as is outlined in our protocol agreement, to collaborate, to answer questions. And I just really wanted to appreciate you and thank you for the naming of that frame and that context as you introduce your staff here today. Thanks for being here.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mayor Leonard. Appreciate that. And thank you, Chair Patrick, and thanks, Council, for the opportunity to meet with you today and address some of the questions I know you have about the budget. I thought it probably would make sense just to start with a brief update for Bowen Council on the most recent outlook for the fiscal 26-27 Islands Trust budget. Last week, we held a committee of the whole meeting focused on further refining the budget that's going to be considered for final review at March's Trust Council meeting. If you watched that meeting, as I know some of you did, alongside updated forecasts and some other changes, trustees considered a range of budget reduction options that were put forward by staff at the request of our Financial Planning Committee. Trustees recommended accepting a number of those options, and if those recommendations are adopted in March, that would mean the current anticipated increase in the Bowen Island tax levy would be reduced to 12.6%. That excludes the 1.4% increase in the non-market change factors. For context, that equates to about $32 a household. I certainly appreciate that 12.6% is still a significant increase, but obviously a significant shift from the preliminary draft budget that was presented in December that I know caused some understandable concern at this table. That, of course, is subject to Council's further review and approval at its March meeting, which may yield some further adjustments as well, but that's where we currently stand. In terms of our process, our municipal tax requisition policy, section C 3.3, does set out that during its consideration of the budget in March each year, Trust Council will be provided with any responses received from Bowen's treasurer in regards to the accuracy and completeness of the requisition calculation. And so, as I think you know, the policy sets out February 28th as the deadline for the Bowen treasurer to submit any feedback, and we certainly look forward to receiving whatever comment you wish to convey to Trust Council by that date, and we'll ensure that it is presented fully for their consideration. So that's where we stand in terms of the current budget draft and the process, and Director Mobbs can certainly answer any specific questions you have about the details of the budget and where it's at. I assume we're going to have some discussion this afternoon, possibly, and some questions about the mayor's report. And so I thought I would also offer just a couple comments on some key points of context around that as well. I certainly appreciate, Mayor Leonard, that you've shared this report with us and took the time and effort to put so much thought into outlining your perspective on the Bowen Island allocation. First, I want to note, just for context for those who aren't familiar, that the allocation model used by Islands Trust is one that was actually co-developed with Bowen Island a number of years ago. I believe from my research that dates back to 2013 or 2014. And so that co-developed model is what we consistently apply in our budget process. And that includes the allocation methods subject to the administrative allocation rate, which is a big focus of the mayor's report. I certainly know that the question of renegotiating the formula for the allocation was identified as a priority by Bowen residents in 2022 through the civic poll. To the best of my knowledge, we haven't had an actual request, formal or informal, since 2022 to undertake such review until really we received the mayor's report in the last couple of weeks. But from my perspective, we would certainly at Islands Trust be entirely open to engaging in a collaborative review of how individual budget items are allocated within that co-developed model, or to revisit the model itself. And I think I can say, based on my conversations with CAO Dillon, I think we would both support staff engaging in that conversation early in the new fiscal year to look at options that could be applied in the next budget cycle. So if the municipality were to formally request that we initiate a joint project to review the model in full, I would certainly be prepared to recommend to Trust Council that Islands Trust accept that request and engage in that work, so that we can make any revisions to the approach that might be appropriate as we enter into the next budget cycle. We're certainly open to working with your staff and revising that approach in a collaborative way, just as the existing model was a collaborative product. I also want to take the opportunity to assure this council that Islands Trust has not in any way been resistant to providing the appropriate budget information as required and requested. There has been, I think, some suggestion that we didn't provide the necessary information to Bowen staff before the December 31st deadline. And so I just want to clarify that we provided the same information and level of detail this year that we have each year, where I believe, as far as I can gather from working with Director Mobbs over the last decade or so, we've been pretty consistent in what we provide. And that always comes accompanied with an explicit offer to Bowen staff to provide any additional information that may be required and to meet and answer any questions they have. Typically, we haven't, my understanding is in recent years, been asked to provide significant additional information. But certainly when we received the requests this year, including in the mayor's letter from February 6th, staff promptly did provide the requested material. In fact, I think we provided some more information than was actually even in that request, in the interest of providing as fulsome a picture as possible. And again, we're certainly happy to review what's provided on an annual basis and augment it as needed for future years. I just want to acknowledge that for many years, what we provided was considered adequate to meet the municipality's needs, or if it wasn't, we were certainly, that was never brought to our attention. So if there is a need to shift and improve and adjust what we do provide, then we can certainly revisit what I think was a shared understanding and expectation, at least at the staff level, of what information was needed as part of that annual process. But again, more than happy to provide additional information in future as a default, and happy to work with CAO Dillon and Bowen staff to identify what that might look like. And so I think maybe with just those context pieces, if it works for you, Mayor, I'd also like to invite Director Mobbs maybe to add any preliminary comments she'd like to offer, and then we're happy to take questions from council. Thank you.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you for that context, Mr. Brownie, and I'll hand it over to Julia Mobbs here.
Thanks, Chair, and good afternoon, Council. It's really good to be here with you today, so thank you for inviting us to spend some time with you. I have been asked to provide some initial thoughts on the report that's in your agenda today concerning the Islands Trust levy to Bowen Island. Of course, there isn't time to address all of the content. It is a very lengthy report, but I'll touch on some of the key points that are raised. First, the report observes that the budgets for Islands Trust Council and Islands Trust Conservancy functions have grown at a faster rate than budgets for planning functions in recent history. And this is an accurate observation and is a significant contributor to the increase in the Bowen Island tax levy over time. These increases are the result of real decisions that have been made by Islands Trust Council, in part to acknowledge changing expectations of the province and the Islands Trust public, to respond to the 2022 Governance Review Report, as well as the 2025 CAO Operational Review Report, to keep pace with the changing landscape of working in a digital age, and to meet the expected service levels in island communities. So while a significant portion of the report focuses on the allocation of general administrative costs in the Islands Trust budget, it is also important to acknowledge the real increases in budgets that support Trust Council and the Islands Trust Conservancy that Bowen is helping to pay for. So because a good portion of the report is focused on the application of the admin allocation rate in the Bowen levy calculation, it seems appropriate to touch on that topic. Again, as mentioned by Trust CAO Brony, it's important to remember that the way the admin allocation rate is currently applied has remained consistent with previously agreed upon methods with Bowen Island that came about via collaborative conversation. Some alternate methods for applying the admin allocation rate are explored in the report that's in your agenda. In these alternate methods, estimated planning service portions are removed from general administrative costs prior to applying the admin allocation rate to determine the amount to include in the municipal pool. The method is applied is incomplete or perhaps inconsistent in its logic. For a method such as this to be properly applied to general administrative costs, it must not only acknowledge the portion attributable to planning services, but also the portion that's attributable to Trust Council services and Islands Trust Conservancy services. So if the planning portions are to be removed and directly coded to planning accounts, then similarly, the Trust Council and Conservancy portions must also be removed and directly coded to their respective accounts. Under legislation and policy, Bowen Island would then contribute at a rate of 100% to those amounts. Only then can the administrative allocation rate be applied to the remaining administrative costs. Removing the planning services component while failing to do so for Trust Council and the Islands Trust Conservancy may lead to incorrect conclusions or unintended outcomes. But having said that, what the report correctly highlights is that there's not just one method of allocation when it comes to general administrative costs. And that is why the current methods used were historically co-developed and agreed to with Bowen Island prior to their application. There's a number of questions or concerns raised in the report that are good questions and concerns to raise. Some of them have already been addressed in the calculation of the Bowen levy, and so we felt it was important to touch on those as well. The first relates to costs associated with the trust's reconciliation function. The allocations in the trust budget already acknowledge that this work supports the planning function in some capacity. Budgets for reconciliation action plan activities, capacity funding, and related staff are split between Trust Council and planning services functions, and as such, Bowen is not contributing to the full cost of this work. Similarly, communication specialists are also split between Trust Council and planning functions, so Bowen is not contributing to the full cost of this work either. The report rightly acknowledges that our executive committee supports local trust committee work. The levy calculation already addresses this by splitting executive committee remuneration between Trust Council and local trust committee services. The report also cites a broad concern that Islands Trust financial reporting by function may be incorrect. The Islands Trust is legislatively required to undergo a financial statement audit on an annual basis. As part of their processes each year, the auditors perform a review of cost classifications by function, which we confirmed with them at our recent audit planning meeting. I'm pleased to report that Islands Trust has not had any reclassification adjustments as a result of these audit procedures, and so hopefully this provides some level of assurance over that particular concern. In closing, I'd simply like to reiterate the message of Trust CAO Brony, that Islands Trust staff have been consistent in offering to meet with the professional staff at Bowen Island to review the levy calculation, and we remain open to this collaboration. With that, I'll turn the floor back to the chair, and of course, we'll stay here for any questions you might have.
Brilliant. Thank you for that context and the initial addressing of my comments. I know that I certainly have questions and comments. I'm sure that council does as well. Given that there are probably going to be a number, I might suggest that just for this delegation, we move into a committee of the whole function, just so we can have that discussion in a bit more of a long form open way. Is there any objections to moving into a committee of the whole? Not seeing any, so we'll consider ourselves moving into a committee of the whole, and I will look to council for questions, observations that they may have. Councilor Fast.
Sure. Well, I'll start off. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Yes, you're over there. I'm on the Financial Planning Committee and have been for about 1 year as of February 17th. I've never been serving as volunteer on that committee before. But I'm welcoming the idea of a review. I think it's good for clarity for everybody to be able to understand what's going on, what's Bowen contributing to. And I just wanted to say thank you to Director Mobbs, because over the past years since I've been on Trust Council, this is my 3rd term on Trust Council, I've been asking questions about what does Bowen contribute to? Where is the Bowen part of this budget? And happily, columns with Bowen Island Municipality at the top have been appearing in different spreadsheets so that I can see what's going on and better understand how what you're calling the model works, the allocation model. And so I just happy to look at that allocation. Personally, glad we're not debating the value of, and because I think to have trust between the organizations and to be able to collaborate together and for everybody to understand and work together, the clarity that could come would be welcome. One of the things that I just want to flag is that for consideration, the current model, whenever or often when I ask questions or others ask questions about the Bowen levy and reducing it, one of the problems for me personally is that it pressures the Islands Trust Conservancy. It seems to, I don't want to starve the Islands Trust Conservancy, which is the network of nature reserves across all the islands, including 3 on Bowen. So whatever we do with the model in the future, that's a question that I wonder if there's any remark about that now, or we can look at that later. Director Mobbs, is there something you can tell me that would reassure me about the Islands Trust Conservancy and the Bowen levy?
Through the chair, if I may respond.
Absolutely, yes. There's
Yeah.
no need to ask permission here in this forum. We're all friends.
Great, thank you, Chair. So the Islands Trust Conservancy is a part of Islands Trust that Bowen Island does contribute to. And under legislation, the contribution rate is 100%. So for the conservancy costs in the Trust Council budget, Bowen is helping to pay for 100% of those costs. They're not paying for 100%, they're paying their share towards the 100%. If we do make reductions in budgets for the conservancy, that will reduce the Bowen Island tax levy, as well as the levy for local trust areas. It could potentially then influence the level of service delivery that the conservancy can deliver. There is some conversation this year that's taken place at the Conservancy Board. They've revisited their budget requests several times now. There is a portion of their budget that this year they will be choosing to fund from their own dollars that have been received from donations via the public. And so that is helping to reduce the Bowen Island levy as well.
Thank you.
Thank you to the chair. I do have a few comments, but I wanted to make them as a preceder or as a lead into offering a motion. I don't know if this is the right form or when we go back into a regular council meeting. So I'll take direction on that.
Well, we'll split it. So motions we can deal with once we come out of committee of the whole, because we can only recommend the council in the committee of the whole. So
Right.
be first on the list for that, and then I'll turn it over to you for questions or comments.
Sure. Thank you. Okay, so I've spent like no small time reading and then rereading the mayor's letter that we're presently discussing, and I tried to read it from a critical and times even a contrarian point of view, and looking for reasons that maybe it isn't applicable to our situation, or is there anything important in that letter that's missing? Didn't really find much along those lines. I've received feedback from others who've read the letter, and I've certainly tried to understand their points of view as well. And I've been listening to the delegation, the offerings we've heard here, and I will certainly continue to listen to the discussion as it continues today. It seems really clear to me, and I think Councillor Pratt pointed this out, and it's also pointed out from the delegation from the trust. So it's been stated numerous times that this doesn't need to be an adversarial relationship. Nobody really wants it to be. It's very obvious to me that there's no debate whatsoever, either in the public or in council or in our relationship with the trust, about the value that the trust brings, and nor is there any debate about the efforts of those people that are responsible in delivering on that mandate. And I include here, obviously, our own trustees, Fast and Getty, and as well as, of course, the entire trust council and executive. I think everybody has a lot of confidence in the efforts that people are going through to make this a really worthwhile endeavor on everybody's behalf. So there's no debate about what the trust is providing us. So it really, the only conversation, as far as I can tell, is about how costs are allocated. And it's uniquely a question of process and a need for further and better information in order to allow council to make the very best decisions that are possible on behalf of all the islanders that we're representing. So far, I've not seen the discussion, the fully formed answers to the questions, some of the questions that were raised in the letter. Bowen citizens presently pay extremely high taxes, in large part, of course, because we don't have a business base and everything comes from property taxes. 90% of our revenue is from property taxes. We're all aware of that, and we all made that choice when we moved here. So it's not a surprise, and we accept it for what it is. That's the cost of living in a place like this. And we appreciate the efforts the trust makes to allow this place to stay the way it is, or maintain the standards that we want. Having said that, it's pretty incumbent on ourselves as representatives of those same citizens that are paying those same high taxes to ensure that any money that we do spend is spent in the most efficient manner possible. I've now got a far better understanding, having read the letter twice, far better understanding the formulas going to the trust allocation that we're required to make. And I'm not convinced right now that we can say with any assurance that we're meeting the needs of those people that we represent. I note that in Mr. Bronny's contribution a few moments ago, we've been informed that potentially, depending on how they allocate their budget or what decisions they make on the final budget for the trust, that the allocation for Bowen may go from 34% down to 12.6%. I know it's already gone down from the 34 based on some information last week, but now down to 12.6%. And I want to be really clear, we appreciate hearing this for sure. Having said that, I'm not sure it provides us any answers that speak to the process concerns that are stated in the letter. It may even raise further questions because there's an appearance that, and this may not be the case, but there's certainly an appearance that this letter might have been an instigation for dropping costs to some extent, in which case I kind of want to know why. And that may not be the case, but it certainly presents that appearance as the letter certainly isn't a threat of any kind, but it's a have a revisit question for sure. And the revisit is a pretty significant potential drop in the allocation. I'm also cognizant of the message that we received today that the present agreement was accepted and in fact negotiated with previous Bowen councils. There's no doubt that that's true. I don't think it furthers the discussion in any way. There's no intimation on the part of Bowen Island, this council, or anyone that I've spoken to, that the trust is trying to put one over on us in any way. Nothing was done improperly in the past. What we're discussing, however, is not the past, it's the present and the future. And I think we need to focus on that. It's entirely possible that a detailed and thorough review of this allocation process, which is what we're suggesting today, it may end us up in the same place that we started, it may end us up with the same allocation that we're making now. It may not go down at all. That's fine. If that's the case, I suspect we'll all be okay with that as long as we believe that a thorough review was done and that the process as it finalizes is appropriate. Those are the comments I got in when at an appropriate time. I'd like to make a motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders. Council for other questions, comments? Councillor Morse.
I also think as part of the review, we should be looking at the trust, the access that the trust pays, and therefore indirectly us, pays for the administrative costs of the Islands Trust service. And I think it's time again to have another look at what are the administrative costs versus are some of the costs that are now being incurred not administrative. Therefore, should be being funded by the Conservancy Board itself. One thing. And I don't think in the past, looking at previous budgets, I've gotten here from 2000. And many times reserves have been used or surpluses have been used. And my understanding is that you can't decide whether you're going to use a surplus until you get at least past your third quarter. So you have a feeling for what's going on. And my understanding from reading some of the documents is that third quarter results have shown that there's going to be a healthy reserve, which is why the reserve has been allocated to reduce general trust council costs. And that's something that, so there's no subterfuge in it.
Let's look to our guests online if there's any comments they'd like to make before we continue moving on with questions, comments from councillors.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'll invite Director Mobbs to elaborate on this if necessary. As Councillor Morse has noted, though, and in response to the suggestion that the decrease from the initial draft levy in December of over 30%, that's a result of our budget process, and Director Mobbs can speak to the steps that resulted in that, but primarily the biggest shift was in an updated quarterly forecast that preceded the preparation of the material that went to the Committee of the Whole. And so that forecast, as Councillor Morse has noted, resulted particularly in identification of available surplus. And so that was a significant factor, as well as some additional savings across a few budget line areas, including the salary side of things. So it wasn't precipitated by Bowen's initial response to the budget. It was actually an outcome of our regular budget process. That said, we're always very conscious of the impact of any increase in decisions. I know members of Trust Council are as well on Bowen's levy, and make an effort to mitigate that as much as possible. With regard to the sort of detailed response to the report, I'll just note that we received it a week or so ago. I think the initial invitation for us to come here was to respond to the initial concerns of the budget, and so we haven't had a chance yet to prepare a formal and in-depth response to that report. And if there's a desire to do that, we can certainly do that. But at this stage, we had those preliminary pieces to offer, and I don't know if Director Mobbs has any additional comments on those topics.
Thanks, Ruben. Yeah, I'll just supplement the comments made around our additional draws from surplus that are helping to reduce the Bowen levy in our most recent version of the budget. Normally, we prepare financial forecasts at the end of Q2 as well as the end of Q3. This past year, we were subject to a job action and a strike from our union staff. And so as a result of that, we did not undertake a Q2 financial forecast. And that meant we didn't have a solid understanding of how much available surplus there might be. So earlier versions of the budget didn't draw in any surplus funds into the budget as it normally does. Normally, we would have an idea of available surplus before the budget travels to our Trust Council in December. And so that's why this year, the number that was presented at December's Trust Council is much higher than you've typically seen. What was the second topic? Sorry, it slipped my mind.
Administrative costs for the trust fund.
Administrative costs of the trust fund, thank you. So am aware that this question was raised, I think it was in 2013. This was before my time, so I don't have full history, but I believe this question was raised in 2013. And my expectation is that it should have been addressed at that time so we can have confidence that the Conservancy's administrative operations costs are those that are reflected in the budget. That said, I think revisiting that question is not a bad thing to do, either with auditors or legal, to help understand a full interpretation of that and make sure that over time we have continued to be including the right kinds of costs in Trust Council's budget versus the Islands Trust Conservancy direct budget.
Well, Councillor Saunders.
Through the chair, I appreciate those responses regarding how you got from 34 to 12. This is exactly the kind of thing we're looking for. As I said, there's an appearance if you don't know these facts, which you've now given us. So thank you for that.
That's fast.
Just a couple more points. One of them is this dropping of the BIM levy happens every year. As more information comes into the Islands Trust budget cycle. And once we get the third quarter results, then it always drops a little bit more. It's just the way the point at which the levy gets calculated with more accurate results. So anyway, just to flag that.
Some questions from this seat that I have, and there's a series of them, and walk through them and spend some time. I've also got some slides we'll put up on the screen that I think will make sense to the full gallery that we have here, as well as people that we have online. Although I think the first piece that I'd like to comment on is just a real appreciation of small organizations and the processes that we have. Bowen Island certainly has a large number of policies and bylaws, and they don't always get reviewed and reflected in everything that we do. And I think, part of the challenge that we faced here in this process and why it's caused some consternation is that we're talking about a tax requisition that usually happens at the staff level and doesn't often sit at the council and trust council levels. And the effect, I think, for this budget term is that from the Bowen Island side, when we go back to version 1 of the Trust Council budget, which had us at 38%, and I believe there was a motion there to strip budget engagement and public consultation out of that budget process as well. And then it gets reduced to 32, 34% in January. And then a couple of weeks later, it gets reduced down to 19. Is that this stuff is like both a moving target for us to really meaningfully engage on, as well, for the community, when we look at it over the span of a term, is really like a bucket of water splashed on us. So 34%, big number. Cumulatively for the term, depending on which version of the financials we're looking at, that was a 70 to 90% increase in our requisition over the course of the term. So that's what's prompted the question, particularly at the governance level, for myself here at the council, is like, that seems like a lot. How does that work? What are we doing? And that's what led to the digging into the report. And, just a name that I can fully appreciate that then there's a bucket of water, cold water, that goes the other way, where it's, we've got a bunch of questions. We're not sure how this works. This is really concerning. When we go through to look at the information that we have in the publicly available budget documents, it's not possible to fully reconstruct the requisition and how that works. We need some information quickly because the trust policy says that we have to push our feedback through our own treasurer CFO by the 20th. So the effect is, just from a process standpoint, we're small organizations, we do the best we can, buckets of water that fly in both directions, and now we're both wet and we have to figure out how to get dry. That's really sort of the metaphor that I have and why I think we find ourselves here today. So with that, I'll look in, I'd like to get into some specific questions because as the director has said, there are some pieces there. There are multiple ways it appears to, or multiple methods to determine an allocation, how that works. And I think the core point, and I'm going to get the corporate officer to start putting some slides up on screen. Even in my own conversations with some folks from the trust over the last little bit on this, there's, a sense, I think, that that I hear that, Bowen Island's squawking a little bit and, they want to have their rate cut down and they don't want to pay into the trust and they don't want to pay for all the good things that we do. And that's just the values-based conversation coming back the other way. And so the way that I've really framed the analysis is that, the goal here isn't to have Bowen residents pay less. Everything in the report is just on the thread of it's to ensure that we're not charged twice. And the reason for that is that we pay our own planning costs. We pay for the offices of our planners, we pay for the heat, the electricity, the computers that they work on, the software licenses that are inside those computers, the heat, the electricity, this room that our advisory planning commission meets in, all of that stuff we pay for already. And so I think it's important to frame some of the general principles from a statutory context that exist here, as well as what's happening across the trust. So based on, and all of this information is based on the information that Bowen Island has received. I understand that there's another form of the budget coming that has us at a 12%. I don't think, I haven't received it, maybe our staff has, but this is part of the process piece where it makes it really difficult to engage and really difficult to analyze a budget that swings wildly in about a 30 to 50% requisition way between version 1 that happens in December, version 2, revision 1 that happens in January that the Financial Planning Committee approves, version 2, revision 2 that goes to Trust Council, just last week. So just for the sake of stating assumptions, this is from the data that we received that's included in our agenda and that we had as of February 10th. And what we see is that this should be concerning for the trust broadly. So we see these federal-wide levy increases, and the two bars for each island here represent the gray bar is the overall tax requisition for that island, and the orange bar, the yellow bar, is if the planning function were stripped out, this is what those islands would be paying. And the most recent figures that we have or that I've seen or that the analysis is based on is this 19.8. The challenge for Bowen is that tall bar for the other islands, if there's a misallocation or a miscategorization, it kind of gets weighed out and would end up in the smaller bar of the overall tax requisition. So there's some internal pieces here that for Bowen, because we're just the canary for the federation-wide levy increases, that if there are allocation issues, if there are ways that pieces are being categorized or not categorized to the local planning lines, then it affects us. It affects us on this federation-wide levy increase. Next slide, please. So my understanding is that every trust dollar has one of 4 jobs, and this is how it's set up in the statute, is that there's those dollars either go to Trust Council operations, to Conservancy operations, to the local planning operations, which are the LTC general operations or the additional operations. And if I'm not mistaken, this is how it's set up in the budget, and this is how the statute says it is: Trust Council, Conservancy, or local planning. Is this, you would agree that Mr. Bronny or Ms. Mobbs, that this is correct? This is how the statute sets it up?
I can respond to that. Yeah, so our statute speaks to 3 functions. So it's Trust Council function, Local Trust Committee function, and the function of the Island Trust Conservancy. So LTC additional operations isn't a 4th function per se that's set up. Rather, it is rolled into our LTC services. But I understand why you would break it out here.
Yeah, it's just because it's explicitly stated in the statute. The statute says that there is this additional operations bucket, but it's still considered part of it. Okay, and so there is no 5th bucket. There's no administration bucket that's set out by the legislation. Next slide, please. And so my understanding for Bowen Island is that the trust dollars from Bowen only have 2 jobs by statute. And so Bowen, by statute, only pays for Trust Council operations or the Conservancy administrative operations. And there's no LTC operations, no local planning operations, because we provide our own, as we named, our own planners, our own bylaw enforcement, our own administrative overhead for that. Is that the understanding of the statute?
Yes, that's accurate. Just as a point of clarity, you might be getting there, Mr. Mayor, but just to confirm, when we talk about the operations of Trust Council and the operations of Conservancy, there is an understanding that includes administrative costs that support those buckets.
Mhm.
So there's
Yes.
direct costs and indirect costs that would support that as well, those functions as well.
Absolutely. And that's, so if we go to the next slide. Just in that, this is how we see it sort of operationalized. This is how I would say we see the statute operationalized from the policy level of the trust, is that we have those buckets, the Trust Council, the Conservancy, and local planning. And we see at the bottom here that local planning doesn't enter into the municipal pool, it doesn't enter into our calculation. And then we have this administration pool, which is created by policy, which gets multiplied by the allocation rate and currently flows into the municipal pool at 34.86%. As a means to remove that planning component from administration. We multiply that by our assessed share, and that's how we end up with the Bowen requisition. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Okay. So let's move on to the next slide, please. So my understanding is the administration pool. So the administration pool is non-statutory. But technically, my understanding would be that every dollar in that administration pool, in substance, is serving one of those 4 statutory functions. Whether it's the Conservancy, whether it's Trust Council operations, whether it's local planning, or some enmeshed residual of all of them. And that the administrative allocation rate tries to untangle those dollars. Is that accurate?
That's fair.
Okay. So to pause on this, I believe is a core piece here. I've spent a lot of time in the report talking about the administrative allocation rate and the pool and how it's constructed. And I'll talk about the allocation rate and have some questions about the allocation rate in a minute. But I'd like to talk about, I believe as was stated by the director, there are multiple allocation methods that can be used on an item. So I have some specific questions about those. And when I look in the workbook, the BIM levy workbook, I noticed in the workbook that the office leases for Victoria, Salt Spring, Gabriola, and Galliano are calculated in different ways. And I'm curious if you're able to walk our council through that.
Certainly, I can provide some brief details. So we have 3 staffed offices at Islands Trust. We have an office on Salt Spring Island, we have an office on Gabriola Island, and then an office in Victoria. The offices on Gabriola and Salt Spring Island only serve the planning function. So they are staffed only with planners. And so the costs for maintaining those offices are coded into our planning services function, which acknowledges that Bowen should not contribute to those office costs as they are directly related to the planning services function. The Victoria office, of course, houses all staff. So it is an organization-wide cost. It serves the Islands Trust Conservancy staff, planning staff, admin staff, as well as trust area services staff, which fall under the Trust Council bucket. And so there is an adjustment that's made to the Victoria office to acknowledge that. And the allocation method seeks to remove a portion that's related to planning services. That is an allocation method for that particular line that was negotiated with Bowen Island in particular many years ago. And so that's why that one is applied in that manner.
Okay. And so if I'm clear, the trust has excluded 3 offices entirely as a result of function. And one of those offices, the Victoria office, has been done by proportional reduction before it gets adjusted by the allocation rate. Is that correct?
Yes, so because we have a very clear ability to distinguish, that the Salt Spring and Gabriola offices are purely planning based, we direct code those into planning. The administrative costs, as the policy indicates, are costs that serve organization wide. And the Victoria office is an office that serves organization wide. It has members from staff across all functions. And so that's why that one is not coded in the exact same way.
Okay. And so I'm curious, just to be specific about the office costs for those offices. Has the rest of the infrastructure of those offices, the computers that sit on the desks, the Windows licenses that sit in those computers, the heating, the lighting, chairs, have all of these been zeroed out as part of the planning function?
So that is what the admin allocation rate seeks to do. The admin allocation rate acknowledges that a portion of cost and administration are going to be in support of our planning staff, in support of our planning function overall. So it would be inappropriate to charge Bowen at a rate of 100% for those administrative costs, because they do serve planning in part, just by their nature. So the admin allocation rate at about 35% is seeking to acknowledge that a good chunk of those costs support planning and planning functions, and Bowen shouldn't help to pay for them.
Okay, and I suppose I'm just curious about the method. So if the leases for that planning function are considered planning costs and are excluded, and so we've excluded the space of the offices and determined that's a planning function and that should be excluded. It's part of an LTC operations bucket that shouldn't pass through the municipal pool. I'm curious why everything else inside of those offices isn't excluded as well. And whether that sounds like it was a previous agreement or it seems incongruous versus just, hey, here's the whole lease cost for the whole organization. We're charging 34% of that, stripping it out. There's an incongruity here that I'm uncertain about.
Yeah, so in history, the Victoria office was subject to the admin allocation rate, exempt of any adjustment. So it followed what our other administrative cost buckets were following, which is the total cost multiplied by the admin allocation rate. And there was a specific conversation around that particular item, seeking to adjust it and treat it differently. And that was accommodated by Islands Trust for that particular line only. So that's why you see a slight difference. I can understand what you're saying here, where it looks like in this line in particular, we are removing a portion related to planning prior to applying the admin allocation rate. So I do understand what you're saying. And that is because that line in particular, as an individual line, was a negotiated allocation method with Bowen Island that the Islands Trust accepted. That same negotiation didn't take place for other lines. Of course, there are other administrative lines where we see direct coding where it's possible to do so, but in many instances, it's not. And the admin allocation rate seeks to apply a methodology that would appropriately remove the portion associated with planning, so Bowen is not paying for it.
And I can understand that. The interpretation that I'm bringing to this is that the administration pool is for truly undifferentiated, enmeshed, unidentifiable administration costs, that to untangle those dollars, as you see on the donut chart here, would be sort of impractical. So there's the AAR effectively tracking a ratio is just a shorthand to get at that. And there was just referring to the comments earlier where if the planning costs were removed, then perhaps that cost would end up in a trust council or a conservancy line as well, which might need to happen. So I'm not arguing one way or the other. I'm just arguing on the principle of it, that if there's identifiable trust council costs, Islands Trust conservancy costs, local planning costs, those should be removed and put in their appropriate budget categories. And the AAR should be designed to untangle that enmeshed residual of whatever occurs. And so the example that we can use here is that thought experiment that I used in my report of the payroll clerk, where let's say and the percentages are completely random. I understand that they're blunt, but I think they're useful to walk through. That there's if the organization by staff is 50% planning, that 50% of that payroll clerk's job could be considered a planning function. And the argument being put forward a little bit, or based on what I'm hearing, is that method B argument that I've said in my report that the remaining 50% then would be recoded to Trust Council, Islands Trust Conservancy, because that's what's there. But that's truly not what's left, because that payroll clerk is also processing payroll for individuals that also support planning functions. Whether it's directors or folks in the trust area services that have planning components woven into their jobs. So there is an enmeshed residual here, which is why that AAR gets applied. And the confusion that I have, and again, I think it's worth mentioning, is that Trust Policy 7.2.6 doesn't mention a negotiation between Bowen Island and the trust on specific budget items. It just says that every item needs to be examined in some way or the other, and identifiable components get removed. And the point that I'm putting forward here is that I believe that that removal is supposed to be in service of getting a pristine administration pool, that all that's left over is that enmeshed residual that's too expensive, too hard, impossible to figure out where it goes. And so it sounds like the criteria for, because in the workbook, it said in the top of the administration allocation tab that the movement from 100% to 34% effectively removes the portion related to planning services. And I've asked the question of why leases are considered for the adjustment, but the rest of the infrastructure in those buildings is considered differently. And it sounds like there's no consistent criteria other than a historical, traditional negotiation of what that should be. Is that correct?
I would say that are you talking about still the office lease pieces or the remainder?
Yeah, the office lease pieces, right? So the example that I'm using is, okay, in those offices, every member of that staff has a computer and they have a software license in there. Those computers get invoiced. If you have 70 staff that are paying $100,000 for software licenses, then 50% of that, are going to the computers in planning staff. So there's identifiable planning components in there. And it appears that the question is, how far do you go to remove those planning components before the AAR is applied?
Yes, so the historical application of the policy, so when it comes to the admin allocation rate, the policy says that administrative costs that serve organization-wide will be subject to the admin allocation rate. So serving organization-wide means you're serving the administrative team, you're serving the planning team, you're serving the conservancy team, you're serving all members. And so that's been the historical understanding and the way that the admin allocation rate has been applied historically. And again, that was the agreed upon way to apply the admin allocation rate to these buckets. It would be an alternate method and a potentially equally as reasonable method to try and tease out the portions that are particularly serving planning and particularly serving conservancy and particularly serving Trust Council staff, and then apply the admin allocation rate to the residual. If we were to do that, of course, we would pull out the planning piece. We would also need to pull out the conservancy piece and the Trust Council piece and apply a rate of 100% to those. The outcome of taking that approach is very similar to the outcome of applying the admin allocation rate to the total prior to those adjustments. Certainly an option that can be explored, but the outcome is very similar for quite a bit more work. One of the reasons, and this is pure conjecture because I wasn't here historically and part of these conversations, but I have wondered if the way the allocation rate has been applied historically and continues to be applied is because the Islands Trust financial system doesn't exist solely to serve the Bowen Island levy calculation. We have financial reporting obligations of our own that we must comply with, and we have accounting standards we must meet. And we also have the requirement for staff across the organization to be able to view their particular budgets and manage them. So if we start allocating small pieces in various ways, it limits our ability to meet our other obligations. That doesn't mean that manual adjustments can't be made in the calculation. We already see some of those. So in the calculation, we'll see a manual adjustment for insurance pieces, for example, that are coded to council, and for elections costs that are coded to council. So there is a way to work it out. But I think my guess is that's why the allocation rate was applied the way it was in history, was to meet all the needs and maybe acknowledge that the difference in outcome is minimal.
And I'm not sure that hypothesis has been tested, that it's, that the outcomes would be similar if the administration pool was teased out a bit more. And I'll go back to the administration, the allocation rate in a moment or two. The other piece in the workbook that gives me pause is that it contains color-coded notes across at least 6 administrative lines. Insurance, telephones, hardware, meeting streaming, orthophotos, each that evaluate an alternative allocation method, which I believe is this pull out the planning rate, put the rest in Trust Council ITC. And in every case, the conclusion is the same, that the alternative is, quote, not in BIM's favor, and the current method is retained. And I suppose it makes me a little uncomfortable to have the other islands, the other local trust areas suggest that Bowen Island is getting favorable treatment. And so there's a desire or possibly an ask here for consistency wherever that leads, because this is a notice that appears on the tax notice of every property owner on Bowen Island. And so I'm curious what criteria other than financial outcome for a specific party determined which allocation method applies to which cost.
So that would have been a collaborative conversation between Islands Trust and Bowen staff in history to look at the allocation models and determine which would be the most appropriate to proceed with or the preferred approach to proceed with. Of course, this was before my time, so I can't speak to particulars of those conversations, but that's where the current allocations have come from.
I suppose I would just offer it does need revisiting because it is a tax requisition. It's collected through property tax, appears on tax notices. And if BC assessment shows between assessment methodologies based on which produced a higher value for a particular property, if they said something like, well, you know, we could use the income approach, but the comparable sales approach produces a higher assessment, we're going to use that one. There's a question of fairness. And, you know, it might skew away from Bowen Island and skew in favor of the other islands. But I think that's a federation-wide question of applying a consistent methodology that's named and can be worked through as opposed to a discretionary one that's based on favor. Moving on, I'd like to talk a bit about Trust Council expenses. It was mentioned that in the budget, the piece that we're working with, there was $150,000 for a reconciliation program that was split across both Trust Council and the planning services lines. And I'm curious if you could walk us through this project and the rationale and method of splitting those expenses.
Certainly. So I touched on this in my opening comments, and there's been a historical and current acknowledgement that the reconciliation function at Islands Trust is in part serving the planning function. We do see costs for engagement with First Nations on projects that relate to planning, such as local trust committee projects. Those amounts are coded directly to the local trust committee projects, and so Bowen is not contributing to that. Our broader reconciliation initiative and the new capacity funding amounts that were added by Trust Council in December, again, we've acknowledged that it's very likely a portion of these costs are going to be serving the planning function, and so they have been split equally between Trust Council and planning services.
And just on the second piece of that question, what was the criteria and methodology that was used to split out and decompose those functional costs?
Currently, the criteria for that is purely an estimate because our reconciliation action plan hasn't yet been approved by Trust Council. And so in that sense, it truly is an estimate of costs. Because we see a lot of the local trust committee costs already directly coded to local trust committee projects, it is unlikely that the larger portion of costs with the broader reconciliation function are going to land in local trust committees, as they already have a dedicated bucket. But we chose not to, code a more fulsome portion to Trust Council and instead split it equally. Trust Council is reviewing their reconciliation policy, I believe, in December. And if there was a rationale to revisit that allocation based on that, we would absolutely undertake that.
Okay. But and you would agree then what I'm hearing is that a functional decomposition based on estimation can be used to split items across Trust Council, Islands Trust Conservancy, and Planning Services buckets.
Yeah, and certainly for costs that are not in the general administrative bucket, that's what we do. So we have direct costs that are coded into our various functions, and then we have general administrative costs that support those functions. And any of the direct programming costs are coded directly to the accounts that they relate to. And so reconciliation costs, of course, they're not a general administrative cost. They're a direct program delivery cost. And so that's why we see them coded particularly to their the account codes that relate to their functions. Just going back to your further question, or, how did we land with the methodology? The 50-50 split, of course, as I mentioned, was an estimate, but about 50% of our planners or of our staff are planners. And so that also helped to inform the estimate. But again, for that one in particular, it's just an estimate until we have an approved reconciliation action plan.
Okay. I suppose the highlight, though, is that those estimates are important, particularly as they move between the Trust Council lines and the local planning services line, because those affect the numerator and denominator of the administrative allocation rate, as well as on the Trust Council side, what's going to enter the pool at 100%.
That's right. They will impact the admin allocation rate, and they'll impact just the dollar value of the functional areas that Bowen is contributing to. We do make efforts in the calculation to remove costs from various buckets if Bowen's not paying for them. So for example, for elections, that's coded to council, and that would then improperly skew the admin allocation rate. And so we remove it in the calculation of the admin allocation rate.
Okay. And then those elections costs also include all of the administration staff time that goes into those elections, the various materials, infrastructure, et cetera.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, my headphone died, so I'll need you to repeat that question so I can hear it.
When budgeting for the elections cost, do those include any of the communications roles pieces, the administrative staff pieces, the infrastructure pieces that would result as a cost of those elections?
So the elections cost is primarily the elections administration. So that's the contracts that we have with the regional districts to undertake our actual elections process. A portion of it relates to sort of things like taking photos for new trustees to post on the website, the nomination package insert, the design of that. So it's various components.
Right. And some that I would presume that are also embedded in administration as well. I'm sure that it takes up time for the Director of Legislative Services, for the CAO, for yourself as the Director of Financial Employee Services, which pulls in some of those resources in a second and third order effect.
So the amount that's coded to our elections cost account doesn't acknowledge the cost of staff time who might be supporting new term orientation, for example. Our salaries costs are all coded into our salaries account. And then the feeding into the Bowen Island calculation at the rates that they customarily do.
Okay. And then you'd mentioned that the communications pieces, those have some functional decomposition, and they end up being split between the Trust Council and the local planning or the local trust committee lines as well, or the planning services lines. Has that been done for the incoming communications lead position, and how is that split determined?
Yes, it has. The split is determined based on what our other communications specialist split was. It seems rational that both staff members would be split in the same manner. The allocation of that particular group of staff has remained unchanged for a number of years. I believe there might have been some review of actual time spent on various functions that informed that historical allocation.
Okay. And then I guess the final question on this line is that has every other employee in the organization, from Trust Area Services, Conservancy, Financial Employee Services, and Legislative Services, based on the audit question that was presented earlier, have they been decomposed, had a functional decomposition into their local trust committee serving part?
So the staff in Trust Area Services that are supporting Trust Council's work, there is a review of those staff, and they have particular allocations. All planning staff, of course, are just coded 100% to planning buckets. And administrative staff, so, you know, Office of the CAO, the finance team, et cetera, they are all just coded into their respective buckets, and the admin allocation rate is applied to them. And the admin allocation rate, again, acknowledges that a good chunk of that time from that staff person is spent supporting planning. And so instead of paying 100% towards that staff, go and pay 34.8% towards that staff.
Okay, and so just to clarify though, the message that I'm hearing is that all of the other staff have had a functional assessment done for how much they serve the 50% planning component of the organization, and those any identified components have been removed. Is that accurate?
Yes, so staff that are not feeding into the administrative allocation rate, their time has been appropriately allocated amongst the functions. I will say there's one staff person, our grants administration, or grants manager, that personally I think could be reevaluated. That's the trust area services staff that is not currently split out between the functions. And there was an assessment done, I've seen in notes many years ago. I think it's worth updating that one in particular.
Okay, I'd be very curious to see those splits and see how they've been allocated. I'm sure our community residents would as well, particularly when we're talking about everything from GIS analysts and policy advisors and payroll folks who are processing payroll for 50% of the organization, how those have been identified and removed. If it is indeed possible, as is being said here, that functional decomposition happens in a technical way. Let's skip forward 2 slides, please. Actually, go back one. And I think this is important, and this is where in the report you see this piece that depending on how any element in the budget is coded, whether it's trust-wide or LTC supporting, there's a very material cost to Bowen's requisition. And this is the main thread of these functional decomposition pieces of, if the trust is an organization that has about 70 staff and approximately 35 of them are planning staff, there's a center of gravity and an organizational orbit that occurs around that planning function that draws everything else in, from the shared services pieces to the trust area services pieces. And for Bowen Island, if those pieces aren't taken out, then it affects a couple of different areas. It affects the administrative allocation rate. It affects the trust bucket that enters the municipal pool at 100%, and it affects the administrative bucket that hits us at 35%. And a piece that hasn't been stated is that if we go back to the original statutory construction of these pieces, that if there's an identifiable planning component, $1 of planning that's identifiable in that administrative bucket, it cannot pass through to the municipal pool. Even 34% of $1 is still 34 cents of a local planning function that if it's identifiable, it should be removed. Move to the next slide, please.
Yep.
Some questions on the administrative allocation rate. So the administrative allocation rate is a blind figure. It doesn't particularly do any examination, and all it is just the Trust Council and Conservancy buckets added up, divided by the whole organization's expenses, which would be Trust Council, Conservancy, and the local planning function. And the challenge that we see here is the blue bar and the orange bar are the Trust Council and Conservancy buckets. The green bar is the local planning bucket. And the line is the increase to the administrative allocation rate. And as we can see, it's only tracking a ratio. It's just tracking the ratio between Trust Council and Conservancy over the entire budget. And the budget itself is being driven by, and this is all indexed to percent growth, a 50% increase in Trust Council expenses and a near 50% increase in the Conservancy expenses, while the local planning function, which deals with local islands getting their OCPs reviewed, their land use bylaws reviewed and updated, has remained effectively flat. So my questions on the AAR is that you would agree that it just tracks the ratio between trust council and ITC expenses versus total expenses. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's the established calculation in the policy.
Okay. So you would agree then that it's not a metric for actual administration consumed, but only a proxy based on the spending profile of the major pools. Is that correct?
That's correct. I will also offer that it's very common in the financial space to come up with a methodology that's determined reasonable, or that's estimated to be reasonable, to allocate general administrative costs. So it's not unusual that we would see a proxy like this one used in this context.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we see proportional proxies like this all over the place. Although the challenge is coming back to the functional decomposition piece and the way things that are allocated and what Bowen pays for is that there's a potential, well, first there's, clearly escalating AAR happening. But also any miscategorization leads to Bowen being double charged. And the first charge is that it's miscategorized in the trust council or trust conservancy pool. It ends up in the numerator of the AAR, which increases our share. For any cost that's not categorized appropriately to the local planning share, it doesn't end up in the denominator, which increases the AAR. And for other folks, it would end up, other islands, it ends up in their planning budget and it sort of comes out in the wash. But for us, it has the effect of pushing up the requisition. Can we go to the next slide, please? And the other telling piece is the growth of administration. And so when we add the year-over-year growth of administration to the chart, administration is the fastest growing pool in the organization. And in raw dollar amount, it exceeds the trust council portions and the conservancy portions combined. And so it leads me to the question of, what is explicitly driving that growth? Is it new positions or functions that serve planning, in which cases those should be in the local planning pool rather than allocated to Bowen through the AAR? Or is it genuinely shared overhead? In which case, what's driving overhead to grow at 3.5 times the rate of inflation?
So I can provide some opening comments, and I'd welcome the Islands Trust Chair or CEO to weigh in as well. So I noted in my opening comments that it is a very accurate observation that's been made to say that the Trust Council buckets and the Conservancy buckets have grown at a much faster rate than planning services. And this is a result of direct decisions that Trust Council has made. So there was a report received by Trust Council in 2022. It was the 2022 Governance Review Report. That led to a greater investment by Trust Council in governance functions that Bowen Island is contributing to. Of course, we also have some changing expectations from the province. And, one of the prime examples of that relates to a reconciliation function in relationships with First Nations. And so that's another cost that Bowen Island is contributing to. The Islands Trust Conservancy as well, just by their nature, they are built to grow. So they are the conservation and land protection part of the Islands Trust Conservancy. They are acquiring new pieces of property each year. And of course, managing those new pieces of properties or managing new covenants is going to come at a greater cost. And so just by nature of the work that they do, they will experience growth over time. The relative lack of growth that is seen in planning services tends to be, that a lot of the services provided in that space were always provided at an elevated level compared to sort of less elevation in the governance and conservancy space. I did take the opportunity to review some of the new staff positions that Islands Trust Council has approved over the last 5 years, which is the term that is used in the report. And in that time, there's been 10 new staff positions. Only one of them has been a planning position. And all other 9 staff have been in the areas of the Islands Trust Conservancy, Trust Area Services, which is council, or in general administration. And of course, the Islands Trust the majority of our budget is staff salaries and benefits. It's about 63 or 65% of our budget. And so that's the driving force behind why those groups have grown as opposed to planning services. The observation that this growth not only influences the buckets that Bowen is paying to directly, but also influences the magnitude of the admin allocation rate is correct. And so if there are misallocations, yes, that's absolutely correct. It will sort of be a double hit. And that's part of why we have a collaborative relationship with Bowen Island, and we share the information under policy, and we seek feedback. So I don't know if our CAO or chair has additional comments to provide on that topic.
I'm happy to jump in. Yes, it was a very conscious effort to invest in this area of the organization. It had been poorly invested in over time, and we have decided to stand behind adding positions in this area. So it was very well politically supported.
Thank you, and thank you for that context. And to be clear, there's no value judgment here on the nature of those positions or the nature of the costs being added. It's more as an observation that Bowen Island gets hit by a double escalator as a result of this. We see the slice of the pie grow in the administrative allocation rate, and then the increases to the administration lines increase the size of the pie itself. So there's a double effect here. And the question and the urging and the prompting of my own report here is that are those costs truly administrative? Or are they identifiable, and can they be removed and assigned to the appropriate buckets? Whether those buckets are Trust Council, Islands Trust Conservancy, or in our case, the one that we're really looking at is, are these three bars, are there hidden costs that aren't going into the local planning line and the local trust committee serving line, especially given that we do all the work in those areas already. Next slide, please. Because it is really stark. The administration lines and the growth in overhead versus the growth in Trust Council, Conservancy. You can see there for reference the CPI and local planning is underperforming even the CPI. And there's a question there, and I think digging into, is this an allocation issue? Is it an organizational priority issue? Is it a combination of both? And for Bowen Islanders who are seeing their tax bill increase significantly, the question is, what is it, and is it being handled fairly? And it's not to say that it isn't, but there's more data that's needed. And even the historical pieces we haven't really looked at this in a while. The CAO, when we had the data return, said Bowen Island hasn't received this level of detail in, I think, 8 years. So there's a need to ask for it. There's a need to collaborate on it. And there's a need to look at the policies which underpin it for the collaboration that's given the moving target that these figures and these numbers have incurred, and what some of the discretionary pieces are for those figures. I would point out, if we go to the next slide, the type of functional decomposition that I'm asking for already exists. So just because I'm a dog with a bone on some issues and my CAO tells me that I need to find more hobbies, I went through the 100 or so business cases from the Trust past 5 budgets. And in every one of those business cases is a line that says staff resources. And so functional decomposition already exists in a very cross-departmental way, in a incredibly granular way. So some of those reports talk about 0.01 FTE of admin time going to something, 0.05 FTE of a project going to planning. So that estimation already exists, and over the course of all of those, and this is just a rough analysis of the business cases, more than 65% of which had that staff resource allocation. The trust itself has identified an equivalent of 23.6 FTE work that exists in those resources for projects and services that it does. And it can do it in a way that is very detailed, that's cross-functional and informs six-figure projects. The ask is that it happens to salary lines, to administration lines, to everything, so that that administrative pool can get as clean as possible before some sort of proportional rate is applied to it, and that there isn't costs and expenses ending up in the trust council line and trust conservancy lines that should be in the local planning lines that affect our pool on one side and then affect the administrative allocation rate on the other. So just some final thoughts that I have before wrapping up, and I'll turn it over to our guests for the last word and any other council members, is that, we've heard that the trust examines some admin pool items for planning content, but not others. And some of that's been on a historical basis. Some of those have just been on tradition. And the argument from this seat is that that methodology should be consistent. So please. It's possible that identifiable planning costs have migrated into the trust council, conservancy, and administration buckets and aren't in the administration context, or can't in the trust council bucket be examined under trust policy 7.2.6 C.2.4, which is that examination and removal from the admin pool argument, or it's not even an argument, it's just stated in policy. Next slide, please. And across 65 business cases, the trust has quantified nearly 24 full-time equivalents of cross-functional staff allocation. So the institutional capacity for functional decomposition already exists for projects and programs that the trust wishes to undertake. And the ask from this seat is that that same functional decomposition happen across every line in the organization, so that Bowen Island is only being requisitioned for the two buckets that it's statutorily responsible for. Next slide. And the administrative allocation rate has risen 29% in 5 years, driven by governance spending growth. I would argue not changes in how administration actually serves planning. The AAR is a shorthand metric that doesn't do any analysis of items in and of itself. All it does is measure the budget ratio, not workloads. Next slide, please. And so we get hit through a double escalator. That planning cost that might be hidden in trust council or the Island Trust Conservancy, push the AAR up from the governance side, and then planning costs that aren't coded to the local planning side, push it up the denominator side by failure to balance that planning side. And then that widening gap is applied to an administration pool that is growing faster than any other budget in the organization, including the governance pools that are driving the rate itself. So there's a question here of whether the administration pool and the AAR as a proportional proxy, which yes is used in other organizations, is starting to become disconnected from the pools that it's trying to measure. So Bowen's paying for a rising slice of a rising pie. Next slide, please. And just in closing, the Islands Trust Act requires the levy to reflect the costs of services Bowen actually receives from the Federation. And ensuring that the methodology delivers that outcome, I believe, is a shared obligation. And very happy to have it in the public view, very happy to be able to discuss it in constructive ways. I believe that's what these processes are designed for, designed to hold. But we want it to be an equal process in a way that is consistent and defensible, and that every island, whether it's Bowen as a municipality or the local trust committees or the Federation itself, feels that we're all operating on the same playing field with a consistent methodology. So those are all my questions and comments. I'll look for our guests if there's any responses they would like to make, or council for any further questions.
Thank you, Mayor. If I can just to touch on a few points there. I think again, we appreciate the depth of your thought that you've put into this, and I hope that Director Mott's responses have helped to clarify some pieces. I do want to reiterate again that yes, we have provided consistent information, and I want to reiterate that we could have and would have provided more if we had been asked over the years. We simply never were. And so again, I have no objection, nor I'm sure does Director Mobbs or Chair Patrick, to providing a greater level of detail in future if that's the desire. And you can certainly request any additional information at its discretion, and we will, as always, do our best to respond to that. I do want to caution about speculating that the allocation is not provided consistently or that there may be misallocations, intentional or otherwise. I think those kinds of things can and should be validated. And certainly that's part of the assessment that can and should be done when we provide the information to Bowen every year. And we're happy to collaborate on that and ensure that there are no inconsistencies or concerns there. That's part of the process that we should be working through. And if there are additional steps that both jurisdictions can take to ensure that that's happening in a more rigorous fashion, we're happy to support that. But again, I think as we said off the top, we're more than happy to engage in a in-depth review of the whole process for how it's allocated. And all we need is the kind of formal request from Bowen for us to initiate that work with staff. And I'm happy to work with CAO Dillon to map out a way to move forward on that. I think, there's an important sort of differentiation in terms of what can be done to meet this current budget cycle by the end of March. And I think, there's a desire to look at particular allocations and where some adjustments might and could be made for this budget, we can certainly do that. A more extensive revisit and review of the allocation formula and, developing any amendments in a collaborative process, as we talked about, I think that's a longer term piece of work. But again, certainly happy to engage with your staff to do that. Maybe with that, I'll invite Chair Patrick or Director Mobbs for any additional comment.
No, I think as you pointed out in the beginning, Mayor Leonard, that we have both very small organizations and our staff do the what is directed of them from the elected body. So if we are requested by you to take a look at the process again, then the Trust Council will be asked if just to dedicate resources or not to that activity.
Thank you, Chair Patrick. And just to one follow-up question to return to a point about who needs to request what. And I note the trust policy 7.2.6 states, and I quote, that all documents used by the Islands Trust Treasurer to estimate a tax requisition will be provided to the treasurer of an island municipality for review by December 31st of each year. So just for the sake of future and next budget rounds, I know there's moving targets and there's information that's needed to provide feedback and analysis. And Mr. Browning, perhaps you can comment on what all documents will consist of and when we should expect them so that our council can review them in a timely way. And particularly, what's going to be different to what we've seen in previous years, given this conversation today.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. As I said, I think there has been historically consistent information provided to meet that deadline. And so I think, to me, and again, this predates my time here, but the fact that the same level of detail that you have requested this year wasn't previously requested year after year after year, to me indicates a shared level of understanding at the staff level, at least, around what was appropriate and that the information being provided was appropriate to meet that. If there's a reinterpretation of that, or we want to reassess that, then again, we're certainly happy to do that. And if the information provided this year provides a more suitable and agreed upon package of information, then we can do that. And that's, I think that's a relatively straightforward conversation for staff to have around what is needed for the expectation to be met and what the revised expectation might be. And we're happy to meet that. And I'm happy to have that conversation with your CAO and then Director Mobbs with her counterpart so that we can provide some greater consistency from this point forward.
Thank you, Mr. Browning. And the only other piece that I would offer is just in relation to what's been raised here today, some of the substantive issues, and then the time runway that we're working with here. So the runway is what we have. So, in terms of the analysis that I provided here and that we're discussing here today, that data was provided on February 10th. I know that Trust Council needs to approve a budget and send it to the minister for approval by the end of the month. But it's not a runway that we sort of defined here. And so I would just presence that, it's incumbent on the trust to identify those local trust committee and planning services components to look at the administrative allocation rate and just to be confident that the statutory buckets that Bowen Island is responsible for are the ones that we're paying for. I don't know what that looks like this year. It sounds like it's probably something for staff to figure out and report back to council. We're not going to get into a line by line debate and detail of it here at this meeting. But the issues have been raised and named. And I'm curious to see what Trust Council does with it in March. So thank you. Councillor Getty, I saw that there was a hand up on your side.
I wanted to take the opportunity to say a couple of things. I suppose starting off with Councillor Saunders' comment in terms of the process with the budget. The 32% was the first draft, so that's the wish list. That's everybody's, best case scenario. And at that council meeting and at the financial planning committee was like, this is never going to fly. And there's some serious work that has to happen here. So this is, the sun, the moon, and the stars, and let's get it down to ground and figure out, where we can reallocate, what we can cut, what we can work on. So that's been 2 full days of meetings and, with both the whole of the Trust Council plus Financial Planning Committee. And there's more it's ongoing in terms of, we just had a full committee of the whole meeting. And that's the process, and it always falls, it always drops from whatever the horrendous number is at the beginning. So it is a surprise and it is a shock, and that's acknowledged by all parties. It's not just Owen, it's the whole of the trust in terms of whatever they started off with. It's a different number because it's a different percentage that's being allocated to different things. All of that said, as much as this, we've been an hour and a half at this, and I'm really, really thankful to Director Bobs in particular, and CEO Brony and Chair Patrick. And I think that if nothing else, Bowen has had a really good demonstration of the kind of working relationship that we have with the professional staff at the Trust. So we can put any question at all at the Financial Planning Committee meetings and at Trust Council meetings to either one of these professional staff and get as thorough an answer as possible with any follow-up that needs to happen. So if there are more questions, I'm really confident in terms of both the caliber and the responsiveness of the Trust staff. And I'm very, very happy. Although I voice serious concerns about the whole process of this budget examination and this report. I'm really very pleased to represent the trust here and supporting the staff and suggesting to you that as trustees that we're representing Bowen as well as we possibly can in terms of all these discussions. So there's questions about it's always happened this way. There's been these agreements. It's been sorted out in terms of there's some things that are too macular and some things that are just too difficult. And this is the way that it got structured. And if that's being challenged, that's fair and that's reasonable. And that's work that the Trust Financial Planning Committee could have dug into if it had been asked, maybe even after the 2022 referendum that we had. I personally think that was an unfair question that was asked in that referendum. We spent an hour and a half today trying to understand the complicated issues that are involved with all of the calculation. And I think that was a really simplistic, unfair question at the plebiscite. Nevertheless, that's what we ended up with. And this is part of the process that we go through in terms of understanding. So, whether I don't think I don't think we should ever get into an instance of who's at fault. It's the way that it's ended up, and we're raising issues and we want to try to examine things. And there's ways of doing that as well in terms of, we've talked about collaboration and cooperation and working with people. And I would like to emphasize that as a way of trying to resolve our differences as opposed to I think some language that was unfortunate in this report in terms of why we're here today, going through this whole process of all these questions to the traditional or the professional staff. So I think that they've demonstrated their incredible value to both Bowen Island and the trust, and I'm very happy that we've gotten through to this point, but I still have some concerns with respect to how we process this whole thing.
Thank you, Councilor Getty. I see Councilor Jurgensen with a hand up.
Audio now. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say thank you to our trustees as well as the Islands Trust staff for being here. Really do appreciate all the effort that is put into our work with the trust, and trust that it will, we'll continue to be able to have discussions and get everything resolved going forward. So yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody for their time here.
Thank you, Councilor Jurgensen. I'm not seeing any further speakers. So I will just thank our delegation for being here today. Thank you for participating and sitting in the chair and asking or answering challenging questions and untangling the trust finances for us. And to you, Chair Patrick, for the conversations we've had, and you've always been willing to speak with me and work with me and understand what's happening on Bowen's end. And this is just to ultimately to inform a clearer process, clearer dialogue for the Bowen Island Trust relationship moving forward. With that, unless there's any objection, we will pull ourselves out of committee of the whole and back into regular council. I believe Councillor Saunders mentioned a motion. Not seeing any objections, so we will do that by unanimous consent. And over to you, Councillor Saunders.
Thank you, through the chair. First of all, I just before introducing the motion, I want to echo what Councillor Getty said about the quality of the conversation here, and it's been encouraging for me, particularly listening to back and forth between Director Mobbs and our mayor, that there's a serious desire to come to an accommodation here that works for both sides, and nobody's trying to gain an upper hand here. And listening to that conversation was enlightening, and it makes me feel like we're a lot closer than, we're a lot closer to getting to where we all want to get to than maybe it appeared on the surface. So I appreciate that, that conversation that went on, and thank you for that. If I can get the corporate officer to put the motion up. So after consideration of all that, I move the council endorse. Make that bigger. Thank you. I move the council endorse the mayor's report and its confirmed findings arising from the trust delegation as BIM's official position on the Island Trust position. And further, that council send a letter to the Islands Trust executive with the mayor's report attached, endorsing the report and its findings as BIM council's formal feedback on the Islands Trust budget, requesting that these issues arising and explored in the letter be resolved prior to the trust fund's budget adoption, and the council directs staff to pursue resolution of the requisition methodology issues identified in the report, in the mayor's report, and the findings heard today. And if unable to find a satisfactory resolution, to report back to council with options for further action.
Motion to sever?
Yep. So we'll look at each clause separately. And I'll open the floor for discussion.
And just before that, can you scroll up, Sophie, because the captions are over the bottom of the page and I can't, thank you. Thank you.
Not seeing any discussion. Yes.
Severing, are we going on each paragraph by itself?
Yeah.
So we're now on the first paragraph.
First paragraph, the council endorsed the mayor's report.
Right.
Confirmed findings.
So I cannot support that. I think it's all council should be doing at this point is the council receives the mayor's report. period. And as, last time the requisition was renegotiated was in 2013. And there's been quite a change in the makeup of the trust area services staff and the expansion of services of trust council. That's where the major staff have been added. And I think because there's been those changes, it's time to just renegotiate and relook at the allocation policy 7.2.6. And so I'm quite happy to receive your report. I don't necessarily agree with some of its findings, so I can't endorse it. And
Thank you. That's fast.
The part of this that I can support, because I wasn't part of, although I got a few emails and offers to submit data and thoughts. I wasn't part of writing the report. And apart from the mayor's presentation of it and the written copy that I received, I'd be happy to receive it, as Councillor Morse suggests, and would probably support the final one if I could see it on screen. Thank you. Yeah, that one.
That's good.
I would be actually endorsing Director Councillor Morris's position. I can't endorse the report as written. I've got several edits that I have made, several concerns, and I'm concerned about the wording of the motion in terms of confirming the end of the first line was confirmed findings. So I think there's a whole lot of things that are still very much in the air and questionable, and there's a lot of suggestions, even the language that's used here, that it's full of suggestions. So I can receive it, but we already have. It's been on the agenda. It's been circulated heavily amongst the community and the council. So it has in effect been received, but I think in terms of fully endorsing it, I would make some, maybe not significant changes, but certainly some I have some concerns with respect to some of the language in particular.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to flag through the Mayor Leonard, and I want to flag a couple concerns with the wording of this. So I want to flag the concern with the current wording of the motion. So as drafted, states that council is endorsing the mayor's report and its confirmed findings arise from the trust delegation. That wording implies confirmation or agreement by the Islands Trust, which I'm not sure has occurred yet. So that echoes an earlier point. And then the other one is just in terms of the timing, the trust has expressed willingness to engage constructively with our staff on reviewing specific budget allocations, but I'm not sure that a full review of the requisition methodology is feasible before this year's budget is finalized and would need to inform future budget cycles. And I encourage council to ask the Islands Trust representation present to see if this wording is achievable for them as well.
Thank you to the CAO. And I'm always happy to have a conversation about what specifics in terms of the language or the findings in the report might be challenged or objectionable. That said, I'm not sure about this motion, but just to reiterate, there have been confirmed findings. So we have confirmed that in lines of administration, there is multiple methodologies applied, some of which rely on favorability, consistency that exists because of historical agreements made by folks that are no longer here. And it might end up affecting the calculation that Bowen Island taxpayers end up paying. There have been pieces that have been confirmed here. There have been pieces that have been stated here that have been incredibly concrete. So it's not a vague values notion. It's are the administration lines being calculated correctly? Is the administrative allocation rate actually being applied correctly? Are we paying for, are Bowen Island residents paying for items that are local trust committee operations that we statutorily shouldn't? And I think there are serious questions about the methodology. And yes, fully appreciating that it's been traditional, that we've just been going at it as is. But these have been brought to light. They've been brought to light in the public and in the council table. And some of the points that have been made in the report have been conceded and confirmed. So I hold the position of council for whatever way that a motion to endorse exists. But I would certainly suggest that we need to provide some feedback to the Islands Trust based on their own policy, which must be in by February 28th. And given that that feedback goes through our treasurer, which is our CFO, direction needs to be given to staff as to what we would like to see on behalf of the residents of Bowen Island, who I don't know where the requisition is going to land. It's been somewhere between a 90% cumulative increase and now maybe a 60% cumulative increase over the span of the term. But that's still a lot of money. And if it came from Metro Vancouver, if it came from TransLink, if it came from any other taxing organization, we want to see a methodology that is clear, consistent, fair not just for Bowen Island, but fair for the rest of the islands as well. That is objective.
Thank you through the chair. Just for information purposes, I put this motion together last week after reading the report, and I realized at the time confirmed might be an issue. And so I was prepared to amend it prior to offering the motion based on the discussion today. What I heard today was essentially that, I heard a whole lot of, yes, that's correct. Yes, I agree that that interpretation is correct. And that was just good two-way conversation in particular between Director Mobbs and the mayor. So I was fine with that. I'm also fine as if confirmed doesn't become part of this. It's not the end of the world in terms of what we're trying to achieve. The second point being the timeline. Completely understand that it might be very much impossible to get a review done in like 4 hours, basically, is what we're talking about, in order to get this done in time. And to me, that's the point of having options for further action. So maybe staff comes back, says, can't possibly do this in the amount of time that's being allocated. Let's do what we can for this year, just on a one-to-one staff-to-staff basis, find out what the final budget is, and then let's work forward. Here's an option, council. Here's what you can do. You can request that this, and this happen over the course of the next year, so we don't have to have the same conversation next year. So again, it's let's get this at the staff level and find out what the options are. Thank you.
Councilor Getty.
That sounds to me like the third part here, in terms of staff to staff, work through what we've discussed today. This is a 46-page report. And, I've got 6 or 7 pages of handwritten notes from today. I haven't calculated whether or not we've ticked off all of the boxes. And, there have been some reaction in terms of, yes, that's true, whether that was testing the basic assumptions or whether that was the findings, confirmed findings. I'd have to go through and look at it in detail in terms of, I think that the third one allows staff to look through the notes, correlate them today, figure out what we can agree on, what's relatively easy to get through, and if as much as possible can be applied into this year's budget. That's not, that's the type of thing that Director Mobbs takes from all the different trustees in different ways. And if she's got the time and the energy and the staffing, she'll do it. So I think if we can make it the third option, that's between the staff to try and figure out as much as we can, and what we agree on and what we don't agree on. And to come back to this council, if there's options that they can agree on, we need to have different results. So I can accept number 3, but not the other 2.
And I'm not sure if I've heard in full based on what we've talked about today, based on the report, but the Bowen Island trustees agree on or don't agree on, and sort of what's the takeaway in moving forward into trust council and financial planning committees, et cetera.
Well, off the top of my head, I would like to sort through what the answers were to figuring out the applications and whether or not things can be, in terms of things were thoroughly enmeshed and that there was some way, there were some difficulties in terms of teasing things out. So I'd like to review what the answers were around that and just see whether or not, and possibly talk to Director Mobs and Trustee Fast and figure out, which ones would be relatively easy and which ones would present problems and we'd have to come up with some other formula.
Well, as I said, I'm reluctant to use language like endorse the mayor's report and its confirmed findings when I'm a spectator, basically. At least that's the role I've taken. I didn't take an active role in writing the report, although I welcome it. I think review is great. I think the other part that I have trouble with in this is its confirmed findings, because like Councillor Getty, I took lots of notes. I'll need to go through them. And are we getting into staff territory here with both the report, which seems very professional to me, that's great, but I would like to move it into the staff realm, the operations realm, as soon as possible. Personally, I don't think that I have the kind of background for doing the detailed analysis kind of work. Although I'll be happy to speak at the Trust Council and the Financial Planning Committee kind of level and to help in any way that I can. My idea is that the more clarity we bring to what has usually been described as the black box, the better. We've heard a lot about buckets today, buckets of costs, buckets of water. And currently I could make a joke about being underwater, but I don't think I am. I think I'm happy, as Councillor Getty says, with that third one. Now I can't remember what the fourth one is. And
There's no fourth.
there wasn't. Oh, no wonder I'm confused. Okay, so thank you, Sophie. So then, as I said before, I'd be happy with the last one, but I can't really endorse or support the other ones because I think we should just move that third one and leave it over to staff to see what's possible.
I'm satisfied with that as well. I mean, it appears that, and I would offer that Councillor Saunders, your motion of point 1 and 2 feel enmeshed. I don't know if they're sort of the same thing, and what I'm hearing, we can debate them separately. But I can call the question on this one.
I'm happy to hear somebody amend it if they need to.
I don't think we can amend it.
Oh, that's right,
because I think
yeah.
it would totally
Separate.
change the intention of so we've got to defeat it and then.
Maybe it's separate in any event.
And I would offer that I'm also okay with it going to the staff level and staff figuring it out. But at some point, council is going to need to take a position on how it feels about bidding for acquisition and the issues that are raised. If it chooses not to take a position today, it's not taking a position today. I'm going to let Councillor Wake in, and then I'm going to move us along because we do have a rest of the agenda.
I agree that, this is a very in-depth conversation to large groups. And I think it really needs to go back to the staff, the professional staff. Based on the tone of the back and forth today, I don't think we've got a big argument here. I think we've got a puzzle we want to solve. And I think staff can solve it together and then come back with some recommendations for us. So I would support the third one.
Let's call the question on the first one then, that council endorse the mayor's report and its confirmed findings arising from trust allegation as BIM's official position on the Islands Trust requisition. All in favor, raise your hands. All opposed?
Nay.
And that fails with only Counselor Saunders.
It's my motion. I have to support
Change your mind.
Okay, second, the council sent a letter to the Islands Trust Executive with the mayor's report attached, endorsing the report and its findings as been council formal feedback on the Islands Trust budget, requesting that issues arising and explored in the letter be resolved prior to the trust budget adoption. I'm almost of the notion of ruling this out of order because we've just defeated a motion that endorses the mayor's report, unless there's
That's
a discussion or a major amendment on this one. I'm not seeing any objection to that, so I'm simply going to rule this out of order. And our third piece here, the council directs staff to pursue resolution of the requisition methodology issues identified in the mayor's report and the findings heard today. If unable to find satisfactory resolution to if unable to find satisfactory resolution, to report back to council with options for further action.
Can you make it clear which council? Because this will also appear in trust council agendas.
I mean, this is, I mean, we can, I mean, it's Bowen's council, so it's.
The exact wording will be repeated different places.
Right.
Thank you.
I'd offer an amendment that we should strike if unable to find satisfactory resolution, and that staff simply report back. Regardless of what the outcome is.
A second.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Fast. See no hands up, so I'm immediately going to call a question on this one because I think it's straightforward enough. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
So now we have a main motion that reads: the council directs staff to pursue resolution of the requisition methodology issues identified in the mayor's report and the findings heard today, and to report back to Bowen Island Municipal Council with options for further action. Any further discussion on this piece? Not seeing any, I will call the question. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
And that carries unanimously.
Did it get seconded?
It was already seconded as part of the main motion, which got seconded. So that is concluded. We will consider the delegation received. I will thank our guests again for being here and hanging in and staying in the hot seat. I look forward to the report back on the discussions that our staff and your staff have. Chair Patrick, I'm always happy to have a cup of tea with you over Zoom or in Horseshoe Bay. I'm sure you'll cross paths further. Thank you again, Mr. Bruni and Ms. Mons. I appreciate your time here as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, John, for the motion. Can we take a 5 minute?
Yeah, we'll take 10 minutes and then come back. Thank you.
If anybody wants a hard copy, I should figure out how to print them.
Audio now.
Councillor Jurgensen, are you able to hear us?
I am. Are you able to hear me as well?
Loud and clear.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, we will call our meeting back to order. And looking at the section 4 consent agenda, are there councillors wishing to remove items from the consent agenda today? Not seeing any. I'll look for a motion to adopt the consent agenda, please. Moved by Councillor Fast, seconded by Councillor Saunders. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
That carries unanimously. Moving down to section 6, business arising for minutes. We have 1710 White South Drive, consideration of an application for temporary use permit. We have Xerxes Howe, our planner one, joining us here today. Council, I note just for the sake of time, you did receive a report in the regular publication of the agenda. I will look to you just ask questions of the planner before we get the recommendation on the table, please. Not seeing any questions. Is there a councillor wishing to make a recommendation?
I move that council issue temporary use permit TUP 2026-004 for temporary worker accommodation use for 1710 White South Drive.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion, debate, question, points of information on this item. That's fast.
Just thanks to those people that responded with their input so that we could know what the neighborhood was thinking.
Thank you. Not seeing any further questions. My only comments on this one, I think it's just at some point we need to look at temporary use permits more generally. Once we get into a 6-year temporary use permit, it starts to not feel all that temporary. I'm okay with this one here. I think the neighborhood impact is relatively minor and in service of keeping construction on the property, but I have a feeling based on what we've approved this term that we're going to see some of the more controversial ones come back, and we'll need some direction on how to handle those as truly temporary. Call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And that carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you, planner. Moving on to 7.1, we have our water conservation bylaw, number 695. Is Mr. Woods here with us today?
He is. I will just check and see what's up. Sure.
Audio now. I'll just look to our manager of planning and development if he's ready to go on MRDT. Yep. Okay, so I'll look for, unless there's any objection, we will lay on the table item 7.1 as the presenter is not here, and pick up item 7.2. Not seeing any objections. 7.1 is laid on the table, and we'll move on to 7.2 MRDT implementation bylaw number 701.
Thank you, Mayor Leonard. I just have a few short slides to get to. So this is about the municipal regional district tax, which is the tax on short-term rental accommodation. I'm just providing here a map just showing where the MRDT is in effect in the Lower Mainland and Vancouver Island, just to show Bowen is a sort of anomaly in terms of it not being in effect on Bowen compared to the Sunshine Coast and the Gulf Island, the Sea Sky Corridor, and many Vancouver Island communities.
Can you just go?
Yes.
The brown, the ones that have the MRDT?
Sorry, the brown and the blue are at 3% or 2% tax rates. And the difference being that 2% used to be the maximum rate, and it's been changed to 3%. And if people have renewed, they've renewed at the 3% tax rate. So the areas that are not either the sort of orange or the blue do not have the MRDT. So you see like West Vancouver and Delta, and that's about the Tri-Cities. But largely all of the sort of comparable areas to Bowen, the MRDT is in effect. So that's something we stress through our consultation with the sector, is that in essence, any sort of natural competitor to Bowen in terms of open air accommodation, if you think Sunshine Coast or you think the Gulf Islands or the Sea to Sky, that the MRDT is in effect. And then I've shortened this slide a bit just to, or this presentation a bit in order of time, but just this is sort of showing the MRDT program for year one in a in a one slide. So I'm showing the revenue sources being that overnight accommodation. So the general MRDT revenue is that from sort of traditional accommodation providers. So there's more than 4 units who don't just advertise online. And we estimate $20,000 in revenue from that. And then we estimate $90,000 in revenue from overnight accommodation providers. And that, or online accommodation providers. So that means essentially you think about the Airbnb or the VRBO rental where they operate fewer than 4 units. And that shows the total revenue that comes in. And then we show how it splits out and where the money goes. So there's one split of money that goes to the administration on the provincial side and our side in terms of administering the tax and the grant requirements and what the province takes as part of the administration of it. And then the remaining that's left, we propose this 2-way split. So between affordable housing and tourism. So you see one way of looking at it is essentially saying that all of the money from the traditional accommodation providers is channeled into the tourism funding, and a smaller portion of the online accommodations funneled into the tourism funding as well. And then that affordable housing piece being that 50-50 split. And then what the program does is that it proposes the affordable housing funding go through to Birch to further their mandate to create affordable housing on Bowen Island. And then the tourism is split 3 ways. So one of the splits is destination management funding, which essentially is to provide Tourism Bowen Island funding to implement their strategic plan. And the sustainability and community stewardship goal, likewise, is to target those pieces of the plan that focus on sustainability and community stewardship. And then the third bucket from the tourism is going to the visitor service, and that's to increase the hours, primarily increase the hours of the visitor center. So that was a key piece of feedback we heard from people is wanting to see that the hours increased. And then just, I always note, it's like the MRDT is a tax program that takes multiple people to say yes to, and any one of them can say no and halt it. So I'm just outlining here that BIM Council has to approve the MRDT application. Both of our regional governments have to approve, so the Islands Trust and Metro Vancouver. And the tourism industry in terms of destination PC, so from the provincial wide thing, accommodation providers with more than 4 units have to specifically approve. So you'll see in the report, I list who those are and what levels of approval are needed from that. And then the tourism industry interest holders require to show general support. And often that's done through letters of support from like Tourism Bowen Island or other agencies. And so where we are today is looking for first reading of the bylaw. That would be the BIM Council approval, and looking for referrals to the Islands Trust, to Metro Vancouver, and Destination BC, those 3 referrals to seek their approval while we continue to work with the accommodation providers on the proposed plan. So that's the recommendation in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you go back to the slide with that one? That's a very nice slide. Thank you. Through the chair. Is that what you would expect money to be allocated in that form, or is that how it's legislated? It must be allocated in those percentages in that way.
That's what's in our proposal.
Okay.
Yeah. So the MRT is open for, it outlines what you can spend it on. It's up to them, sort of the program that's put forward to plan it. And so this is what's proposed in year 1. And in essence, to the 5 years of the MRDT budget. So you approve a 5-year plan. At the end of it, we have to reapply. We need a new plan. But what I note in the report is that, year 1 is an estimate. The province doesn't provide an estimate of like how much PSD they collect right now on overnight accommodation. So it's really an estimate. And we say at the end of year 1, we're going to have to re-evaluate based on what actual money is.
Thank you.
So I've got one question on what are you going to spend the 5.5 thousand on for administration?
Like essentially staff work on reporting, on that grant reporting side of it.
So it's just filling out forms.
Yes.
That's good.
Is this, there was some sort of a meeting that you and Blair had after our previous discussion, and how did that go? Was the answer better likelihood of the 50-50 split kind of thing?
I don't like to speak for them in that sense. I mean, I think we had a good discussion about where the money comes from and where it goes to. And I think, so we offered the invitation to all 6 accommodation providers, and 3 were able to attend. And I know like one specifically said that at the end of the meeting, they felt more comfortable with a 50-50 split. And the other two, I think one of the points that Tourism Bowen Island and Birch both made is that the MRDT is this available money that would be taxed on overnight accommodation that would provide additional funding for Tourism Bowen Island and Birch. That if there's not agreement, then nobody has additional funding, right? So it's, there's lots of people who have to agree. And to some extent, it's going to be a compromise. And one of the things we were trying to show and what this graph shows too is that the 50-50 split is in a sense for the municipality is a compromise. Another way we could approach it is to say maybe all of the general MRDT revenue goes towards tourism, and all of the online accommodation goes towards affordable housing initiatives. Like would be another way we could have approached it to say, and so the 50-50 is a compromise from the council to say, okay, well that's a straightforward way to split it as well.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. I'm not seeing any further questions. If you put that, such a pretty little diagram. I appreciate this one. So the meeting that we had, council will recall that we have had discussions on the MRDT previously, and that was where the 50-50 split originated from. As you can see, I think what's important to notice on Bowen, which is unique, is that overnight accommodation provider revenue, which is Airbnbs, VRBOs, all of those pieces that exercise market influence in residential neighborhoods, is much, much, much greater than general MRDT revenues, which would be different than Whistler, right? You would see all of the major hotel chains and the hotel providers, they would be providing the majority of that MRDT revenue versus Airbnbs, which would be providing the non-already. So for the sake of fairness, we sought a 50-50 split, as I recall, council's previous direction, and this is what staff has come back with. Not seeing any further questions, perhaps we'll get the recommendation on the table, please. Councilor Getty.
The Bowen Island Municipality Short-Term Accommodation Tax Bylaw number 701/2026 be read a first time. The council that council refer bylaw 701/2026 to Metro Vancouver and destination BC. And that council refer bylaw number 701/2026 in the attached Islands Trust policy checklist to the Islands Trust.
Moved by Councilor Getty. I will assume that Councilor Jurgensen seconded all three of those, unless I hear otherwise.
Yes, sorry, was trying to get that in with the Zoom delay, so that was meant for the whole thing as written.
I'm not seeing any hands up for speakers, so I will call the question. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
And that carries unanimously. Unless there's objection, we will pick up from the table item 7.1, the Water Conservation Bylaw number 695/2025. Doug Woods, our bylaw services supervisor. See no objection, I'll just pick up from the table and over to you, Mr. Woods.
Okay, starting to wait there with me. This was brought in front of you guys last summer. That's the information item. And since then, we've done some public consultation, got some feedback, incorporated the feedback into the draft, which is the one you have before you. We did incorporate a couple of the ideas from the feedback, and I've put some responses to the rest of the feedback in the report. Happy to take any questions you might have about this.
I'll look to council for questions. Not seeing any questions. I'll let the council for the recommendation, please. Councilor Fast.
I'd be happy to move these recommendations. Whereas public consultation on water conservation bylaw number 695 has been completed and feedback incorporated, therefore be it resolved that Bowen Island Water Conservation Bylaw number 695/2025 be read a first, second, and third time, and that Bowen Island Municipality Bylaw Notice Enforcement Bylaw number 196/2008 Amendment Bylaw number 697/2025 be read a first, second, and third time, and that Bowen Island Municipality Fees and Charges Bylaw number 651/2024 Amendment Bylaw number 698/2025 be read a first, second, and third time.
Moved by Councilor Fast, seconded by Councilor Getty. Any discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
And that carries unanimously. Thank you for your work on this, Mr. Woods. Yeah, for the public who might be following along later, I think this has been long overdue. We've had water use on the books, but no way to enforce that overuse, particularly as we're feeling the effects of climate change and the stress on our water systems. I know that all of council, as we just voted, are very supportive of this. Hopefully this gives you the tools that you need. Thank you. Moving on to 8.1, policies for incorporation within the revised official community plan, OCP. We have our item A. And it's fairly straightforward. The report is in the agenda. I'll leave the council if there's any questions on the planner. Not seeing any questions. May I have a recommendation on the floor, please? Council Fast.
I move that council refer policies 0107, green building standards for residential rezoning, policy 13003, economic development policy, policy 2202, conservation development policy, and policy 0804, affordable housing policy to the official community plan steering committee for consideration of adoption into its revised OCP, and then return to council with the results.
By Councilor Fast. Seconded by Councilor Getty. Any discussion on the motion? From the seat, I love the idea. I think it's fantastic to absorb these policies in the official community plan. I think it's also a nice cheeky move by planning to pull these out of their general policy review, throw them to the steering committee. So congratulations on that great piece of policy work. And I think it'll strengthen our OCP, and I really look forward to seeing how they incorporate it into our draft OCP when it comes back to us. Not seeing, yes, Councilor Fast.
This is great, and I'm assuming that, can you just tell me briefly when will a draft go out to the public, or is it out now?
Good question.
OCP? I'm talking to the planner.
I've just got on board with this. We were going.
Oh, right, we switched them around.
Then, do you know where we're at?
Sure, we anticipate the committee has a draft that they're considering at a workshop on Thursday, and I believe we're scheduling to come to council with a draft at the March 16th committee of the whole.
Thank you.
If I'm not mistaken, the intention of coming to both committee and council for that is before it gets sent out for engagement.
Correct. So public engagement would follow the March 16th.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Not seeing any further questions or comments, I will call the question. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And opposed?
Aye.
That carries unanimously. Thank you to the planner. Moving on to 8.2, draft consolidated 2026-2030 5-year financial plan update. We have our CFO joining us here today.
Thank you, Mayor. Through the mayor to the rest of council, I'd like to take this opportunity to run through my presentation with you. It summarizes everything that's in the report that you received today. There we go. Okay, did you send it to me? I have, it's not part of the agenda. It will be made part of the agenda today.
Okay, but you said you sent it to us today?
No.
No.
I didn't.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something
No,
big.
this is the first anyone has seen it.
Okay,
Oh, so that's why my link isn't working?
I don't know that you'd have a link to it.
I've got a link to the draft consolidated budget.
That's a report. Yeah.
It's history.
Oh,
That's a written report. This is beginning presentation. Some of these slides I'll be reusing for the open house presentation today this week. Yes. So starting just kind of where we're at, all of the budget information is really readily available right off our homepage by clicking on that 2026 icon. So anybody for the public can really find the information quite quickly. We've also set up, as in prior years, we've set up a dedicated email address, feedback to budget@bimdc.ca. And we also tend to get several letters and emails directed to council directly at that mayor and council email address. So just to start off kind of where we're at, as an overall State of the Union. We started back in January, we took a look at the assessment data, and I reported to you at that time that the overall market change for Bowen Island was a decrease of about 1.9% in assessed values on Bowen Island. We also received a positive non-market change. Those are changes that include reclassifications from one property type to another property type. So say from residential to business, that tends to happen quite a bit. It's also any new value that's resulting from construction activity, so new building permits, new housing construction, that kind of thing. And it's also any added incremental value of new lots that have been created through subdivision. So the impact of the non-market change on Bowen Island would be effectively to create new assessment roles that weren't there in prior year, which in any other case would typically result in an impact to the property tax roll of 1.44%. So effectively we could reduce the property tax rate by 1.44% and still levy the same dollar amount as we did in prior years. This year in particular though, with the property tax ratio, there's been a change. We are looking at decreasing the amount of property tax that's going to be paid by the utilities properties, the class 2 properties on Bowen Island. So those are properties owned by Shaw and Rogers and Tellus, they're utility properties. And we have to do this because there is a provincially prescribed maximum rate that can be charged to those properties. And that is $40 per $1,000 of value. That's the maximum rate of tax that you can charge them. And in order to get to that maximum rate of tax, we have to charge a rate that is 15.61 times the residential rate. And that will result in a little bit of an increase, a little bit of a shift from the property tax collections from the utility properties to the residential properties this year. And effectively what that does is this shift offsets the impact of that non-market change. So we're not really reaping any benefit from that this year. Council does have the authority to establish those property tax ratios. As I just mentioned, those under this plan, the utilities will pay 15.61, and that will generate the maximum amount of $40 per $1,000 of value. At an earlier committee of the whole meeting, council did not wish to give direction to or give a recommendation that staff review or provide or consider alternatives for the business tax rate. So this year, the business tax rate will be left the same as what it has in prior years. So businesses pay a 1-to-1 ratio, same as the residential properties on Bowen Island. The proposed 2026 property tax increase is 6.6%, and that's being driven by several factors. Some of the most significant are those including we're looking at some reductions to our operating revenues this year, about 275,000, and I'll go into those in a little more detail. We have inflationary and cost of living adjustments looking at about 160,000. By far, our biggest expenditure is our staff. Our staff last year was about $4.7 million of our overall budget. So those inflationary cost of living adjustments do take up a significant portion of our tax increase year to year. We have some new staffing requests that are adding about $150,000 of revenue required to the property tax rate. We are increasing our contributions to reserves by 60,000. We also have another increase of 25,000 to our non-statutory reserves. We're increasing our transfer to the library for their budget of approximately $35,000. And then we kind of offset that by we've removed one-time non-recurring expenses, net of about $65,000. So taking a look at our general fund revenues, the total overall year-to-year property tax increase is almost $600,000. That works out to 6.6%. And we believe that a property tax rate increase of approximately 5% each year thereafter will be required. The garbage parcel tax rate is proposed to increase from $638 to $650 per property. And we're using those that income to fund some improvements at Bird that we have lined up for this year. The sale of service revenues are looking at about a decrease of approximately $27,000. Sale of service are things that we provide to the community. It includes recreation fees, it includes facility rentals and wharf fees. In 2026, we're looking at removing $50,000 of income from the fire hall lease, which we no longer own and rent out anymore. And we've also taken a look at facility rental revenue in the 2025 budget. We had it in there at $60,000. We've decided to take a more conservative approach this year, and we've reduced that number to $30,000 for this year. Our recreation revenue is going to be increased. We're looking at approximately $250,000 in recreation revenue. Our facility rental revenue, as I mentioned, $30,000. Our wharf fees and mortgage income is quite a bit higher. It's about 60% higher now that we have gone and redone the wharf fees bylaw to increase those fees, sorry. Business license revenue, we estimate at approximately $85,000 this year. We generate around $20,000 a year in recycling revenue. We have some miscellaneous permits, some other miscellaneous rentals, and school tax administration fees, rounding it up at $6,500. General fund grant revenue. So that number is significantly lower this year, drop of about $972,000. The thing with grants is that they typically finance specific projects. So if the grant is not received, then the project doesn't go forward. So the reduction in grant revenue typically doesn't impact the property tax rate because it funds things that are tend to be outside of our regular program of services. Some of the significant grants this year that are included, there is one single grant that we get from the province each year. It's our Small Communities Grant. That is used just to offset the cost of operations. So any reduction in our Small Communities Grant will certainly have a direct result on the property tax revenue requirement. But we are estimating that at $450,000 this year. We have $132,000 expected to fund the Fire Smart program. $77,000 is our community works grant. That's also called the gas tax grant. We'll be expecting $230,000 of the Eagle Cliff water culvert grant, where that will be used to fund the culvert portion of the project. And we will be accessing $290,000 of housing accelerator funds. We'll be using those to fund some strategic initiatives that have been identified by council. We have $50,000, which is funding the balance of the OCP update project. $50,000 in an NG 911 grant. That is a grant that is given to us by the province, and it's being used to improve our data that's supplied to the fire department. So mapping data, data about finding homes and locations on the island. So that work is just ongoing. It's been going on for a couple of years now. We have about $50,000 remaining to spend to improve our maps. $60,000 of emergency operations between the two initiatives, $30,000 each for EPC planning and $30,000 for social services programs this year. And we are looking to access $150,000 of TransLink OMR, that's municipal road network grant funding, and we'll be using that on a capital project this year. Some of our other revenues, looking at our development fees, we expect them to be reduced by about $70,000 from last year, just with the slowdown in the construction activity on the island. So we are expecting $275,000 in building permit revenue. We did budget for $350,000 last year, and we did not meet that target. So $24,000 estimate for rezoning fees and variance permit fees, that kind of thing, and another $23,000 potentially to be earned in inspection and administration fees. We are expecting lower investment income in 2026. We budgeted 2025. We budgeted $400,000. That was a little ambitious as well. So we have dropped it. Two reasons, but the interest rates did continue to go down over the course of the year. And we do have less cash in the bank that we're earning interest on now that we've burned through a lot of it to build a lot of our capital projects. We estimate $144,000 in tax penalties and interest, about $8,000 in bylaw fine revenue, and we expect to earn approximately $6,000 in electric charging station commissions from the 2 locations that we have. Overall, other income is down by about $180,000 from 2025. I'll take a minute to go through our operations expenses. So we do see potentially about just over $200,000 increase in operating expenses in our general fund. Starting with the staffing requests, there were 3 positions in total, not all of them full-time, but we did request a 1.0 FTE Strategic Initiatives Officer position in our admin department. We estimate the cost of that position to be approximately $120,000 per year. That's the cost of both salary and benefits together. We're looking at this to ensure that we have the dedicated leadership and coordination of our municipal strategic projects, including some of the big ones that we have on our plate this year with Snug Ferry marshalling, our procurement and purchasing policy, a leadership development program, as well as a new one which is about establishing some accessible transportation alternatives. We need this position to ensure that the projects are prioritized and implemented effectively. They're often spread among several people's desks and they're easy to lose track of. So we want to ensure that we reduce the risk of inefficiency, miss milestones, and ensure alignment with council's vision. The next position that we requested this year was a full-time Parks and Roads crew worker position. That's an increment of 0.4 full-time equivalency FTE. Overall, a 1.0 position costs about $88,000 per year. But this one will have some significant cost savings. We do estimate cost savings of up to $30,000 in order to resulting from our reduced reliance on contractors. As well, we will be canceling the summer staff position at a cost of $38,000. So it really does bring the cost of that additional FTE down. We also won't be looking to hire the auxiliary snow plowers in the winter anymore. So it will overall provide us with a higher level of service to the public. The last position is the fire training officer. That is an increase of 0.4 FTE position. And this, the cost of that is approximately $36,500 per year. The position is needed to address the rise in call volumes and increase in service demands that are been placed upon the volunteer fire department. Looking at our responses over the last several years, they've grown from 166 in 2021 to a confirmed final amount of 270 calls in 2025. Looking at the departments, budget by budget, the mayor and council, the legislative budget is increasing in 2027 by about $60,000. And that is as a result of new elected official remuneration policy, which was adopted by council. So the incoming council will have an increased level of remuneration. The budget was also going to cover technology costs. It covers conference attendance and travel expenses of elected officials. And we've also added a $10,000 provision in both 2026 and 2027 to cover off any costs that are related about orienting new council members. So we will be having an election in October later this year. On the admin and finance side, the budget does include funding for 11 staff. There's 4 finance, 4 administrative, the CAO and HR coordinator, and we've now added this provision for the new strategic initiatives officer position. In the admin and finance side, the staffing budget has been adjusted by approximately $120,000 to accommodate that position. We've increased professional development fees by approximately $10,000 based on a training plan. Professional fees have been reduced by $20,000, and that's for the removal of the records management information position. It wasn't a position, it was just a part-time auxiliary. It was never a full-time position. Our audit fees, I've reduced them by 8,000 to remove a one-time fee for a new revenue implementation of a new revenue accounting standard in 2025. General government expenses, these are expenses that are paid on behalf of the entire organization. So it's general costs that are allocated to all departments. It includes our office expenses and our liability insurance, includes our telephones and communications, and also includes a provision for HR recruitment, joint health and safety committee, and HR consulting this year for 15,000, which is to undertake the salary review market for exempt employees. That is according to the staff compensation policy that takes place once every 4 years. Community grants, there are some predetermined amounts in there, approximately 61,000 for the Hearth. I've earmarked 12,500 for Family Place. Bowen Island Museum and Archives is in there for 33,950. I do know that the direction has been given to staff to discuss about the expanded level of service with the Museum and Archives. So that's one little project that's floating out there still. There is 25,750 earmarked for tourism Bowen Island. And as well, 35,000 of provisions set aside for the second year of the Hearth Programming and Production Coordinator Grant, if that is approved by council. That leaves about $30,000 left over for application-based grants. For the fire and emergency budget, 2026 includes an increase to the staffing complement of the 0.4 FTE, which was requested. And as well, the staffing, just the regular staffing component includes 3 staff. There's a full-time chief, a deputy chief at a 0.8 FTE, and a training officer at 0.8 FTE. So that budget is quite comprehensive. It also includes the maintenance and the operations of both fire halls, the satellite out on Adams Road and the main fire hall on Miller Road. It includes all of the costs for volunteer training and on-call pay. It includes the cost to provide volunteers with extended health plan. And it also includes fuel and maintenance for all of the fire vehicles. And the emergency planning side of it, that is also included within this budget. So there is a 1 FTE emergency planning coordinator position that is funded from that budget. And it includes about $250,000 of externally funded grant program expenditures. So there's, as I mentioned before, the Fire Smart grant, the emergency planning coordinator and ESS grants, the NG 911, as well as a little leftover grant to carry out First Nations emergency planning and communications programming for this year for $8,000. In bylaw, we have almost $300,000 budgeted. And in this year, we are including a very enhanced ferry marshalling staffing component from May to September. This is in support of implementation of council's identified strategic priority to deal with ferry marshalling in the Cove. We are working at the moment on researching some methods to establish some user fees for the use of streets for ferry marshalling, as well as to increase enforcement for parking in the Cove during the busy summer months. Our public works budget is estimated at about 1.4 million, 4,075,998. And that includes a staffing complement of 8.1 FTE. This includes 4 operations workers, half of a foreman position, 1.0 manager position, a 1.0 infrastructure manager, which is currently vacant, a 0.6 director of engineering. The other 0.4 of the director of engineering goes and is funded through the utilities budgets, as well as a 1.0 administrative coordinator position. The budget includes all of the costs to undertake vehicle maintenance, fuel, insurance, all of the road maintenance materials that are purchased, such as salt and sand and gravel. It includes all of the staff training and professional development costs, as well all of the ongoing annual fees needed to maintain and look after our docks and ensure the docks. We have a budget for an arborist subcontractor to look after our hazardous trees program, and as well to look after the works yard and maintenance. As part of our asset management strategy this year, BIM will be undertaking an unusual and interesting pavement condition assessment project. So this was approved in last year for grant funding. So UBCM is funding $25,000 of this program, and BIM will be funding the remaining 25,000. So it's going to start in a few weeks from now, I believe. And you will notice a vehicle driving around the roads with some equipment attached to it. It's going to drive all the roads and collect data on road surface condition and quality. So we're going to use that data to inform the pavement rehabilitation program going forward. So we're going to be looking at making data-driven decisions to decide on how to spend our capital program dollars. The solid waste program, this has been a long-term 10-year contract with Bowen Waste, and it's expiring at the end of this year. So this year, at some point, we're going to have to negotiate a new contract for the upcoming service period, which starts in 2027. So future costs really beyond this year about what we're going to be paying for solid waste services are really uncertain, but certainly almost as soon as we're done this budget process, I think we're going to be looking at beginning the negotiation process for that. It's such a big, significant contract. In our community planning department, budget is $685,220. Our staffing complement, it's mostly staffing in the planning department. There's a 1.0 manager of planning. We have 2 planners, a 1.0 combined building and business license inspector, and a 1.0 administrative assistant. So other inclusions in the planning budget are provision for legal review of permit or development decisions or new bylaws. We have $25,000 there. We have training and professional dues and travel expenses for the staff at $17,000. And as well, we pay professional fees to a subcontractor who looks after things like land title registrations for us and such. So there's $13,000 in there. The strategic planning budget is just a kind of a little bucket all on its own that includes several projects and initiatives that are managed by more than one department, or often they're council-driven initiatives. In 2026, I just want to share with you what we have in there. We have $150,000 being paid to Birch Housing Society. That's funded from the Housing Accelerator grant funds. We have $50,000 grant funded again to complete the OCP review. There's $77,000 for the acquisition and implementation of asset management software. We're using our Community Works funds, the gas tax funds, in order to pay for that. $20,000 for DCC bylaw development, also funded through the Housing Accelerator Fund. I put an $88,000 contingency in there for it's a year where there could be some extraordinary legal fees or potentially from the outcome of a market salary review. That contingency I put in as a use of surplus, just as a placeholder for now. $30,000 other miscellaneous expenditures are included. There is direction to discuss service arrangements with the Heritage Committee. There's costs to fund the parking lot in Snug Cove. There are costs around holding an event to do volunteer appreciation, and as well as funding for the EDAP committee. In our
economic development.
Yes, Economic Development Advisory Committee. In our community recreation budget, it's just over 800,000 this year. It includes a staffing complement, a full-time staff complement of 4.0. There is the recreation and community services manager. There are 2 programmers and a booking coordinator, communications coordinator position. And using the funds that we had in last year's budget that were previously earmarked for the youth services coordinator, in 2026, we are proposing to engage a consultant to undertake a youth services needs assessment and recommend a service program at a cost of $40,000. With community recreation and during the interim, in order to deliver programming aimed at youth, we have relied upon auxiliary staff to assist with the delivery of youth programming, such as take over the community center team night, skate days and other special events that are off island. So additional operating costs that have been added to the 2026 budget that result from the ramping up of community recreation services here that we're at our new location. We're getting more programming, so we will anticipate paying more in the ActiveNet software licensing fees and commissions taken from credit cards, that kind of thing. We have $5,000 set aside to pay the movie licensing fees. And we know that we are going to have more fitness equipment maintenance, so we've added $2,000 to that budget. And we have a $2,000 additional budget for our staff's professional development. In the community parks and environment, that budget is approximately $414,000. Staffing complement there includes 1 FTE Parks and Environment Manager and half an FTE, the other half of the operations foreman position is allocated to parks. And this year, the Parks and Environment is seeking additional staffing support. So the proposal, which as I've already mentioned, is to increase the FTE complement by 0.4 by removing them, canceling the summer staff positions and having replacing that with a single full-time year-round position. So we talked about the estimated net cost of that and the actual the cost to this year, this fiscal year itself is very almost negligible because we're not planning on hiring that position till halfway through the year. And then on top of that, we were canceling the part-time staff. So to have that full-time person in there for half the year, it's kind of a wash. For the community parks and environment budget, the focus of this department this year will be to work on planning and implementing the Grafton Lake Watershed Management Study. They're also going to be providing support for community projects such as the Sustainable Community Grants Program and working on implementation of the Parks Plan and the Climate Action Strategy. And our last department, looking at our facilities management, we've now had almost a full year of operating the community center, so we have a pretty good handle on what the costs are. Basic staffing here includes 1.0 FTE manager and approximately altogether just about altogether 2.0 FTE combined part-time custodial positions. So there's always a custodian on site when the building is open to the public. And in those events, in those cases where there's an event that takes place outside of those core hours, that's when the event itself is charged in order to pay for the extra time, custodial time that's needed outside of those core hours. So in 2025, we did have one-time costs of about $45,000 related to the opening of the building. We've taken those out for this year and we've added back some new costs. So we know that we're going to have to get our septic field pumped this year. We're going to have to undertake some integrated testing of the building's life safety systems. So we've taken some in, we've taken some out, and overall the budget is down a couple $1,000s from prior year, now that we have a better handle on what we can expect for the operating costs. As well, also in keeping with our focus on asset management, our budget does include an annual contribution of $50,000 to the facility, to a civic facilities reserve fund. Moving on to the capital budget, looking at our fire department, we have 3 asks in the capital expenditures for the fire department. The fire department has seeking approval to acquire a new fire chief pickup truck at a cost of about $77,000 for the truck and to outfit it with lights and decals and all of that kind of thing. They do an annual replacement of their turnout gear, which we put in a $20,000 provision each year, as well as an annual replacement of fire equipment. So that's things like hoses and chainsaws and smaller equipment kind of thing that is used by the fire department. We have technology investments planned for this year. We have a $95,000 conference room audiovisual upgrade, which is going forth right now. The that project is valued at $95,000. It's funded 70,000 from our capital renewal and replacement fund, and it's funded $25,000 from grant funding. Our ongoing computer renewal is also being put forth this year. That too is being contemplated, funded from the capital renewal and replacement. We have planned some significant dock upgrades. We've got several pilings on Snug Cove Dock that need to be replaced. We are planning to initiate that project this year and have set aside $500,000 to fund that project. That funding is also being made available through the Capital Renewal and Replacement Reserve. There is also beginning on the Mount Gardner dock, also requires some upgrades and definitely a replacement of that old float at Mount Gardner. So that work is to begin this year, and $50,000 has been set aside for starting that project. Our roads rehabilitation and culvert project is in the budget for $1.2 million. Part of what we're going to do is in conjunction with the Eagle Cliff water project. So $230,000 of that will be funded through the Eagle Cliff grant. And so we're looking at using $970,000 remaining from the roads reserve in order to fund the balance of that work. So we will be spending primarily on what is needed to be done as part of the Eagle Cliff water main project. But we are waiting for those high priority roads identified in our pavement condition assessment to prioritize to develop our 2027 pavement rehabilitation program. Trunk Road will be upgraded significantly with some new lane marking. We're looking at using thermoplastic technology to put some really bright and visible signage etched right into the road. We're spending up to $150,000 of our Translink Major Road Network money in order to fund that. And this is building upon work that we undertook last year through an ICBC partially funded lane marking study. Our Grafton Lake Watershed Management Plan is coming in this year at approximately $100,000, and it was funded $25,000 by Cove Bay reserves and $75,000 by community parks reserves. We're looking at undertaking a water master plan for $200,000 this year. It could be more should we get additional grant funding, but at its base, we're looking at funding a study of $200,000, and that's funded partially by the water systems themselves, $120,000 contribution there, and $80,000 from our community works funds. The remaining balance of our community works funds, that's our gas tax fund. 2026, it's a real big year for plans. We're looking at beginning the first phase of our asset management plan. We've set aside $150,000 from our capital renewal and replacement reserves in order to fund that. We have some new requests for fleet and equipment. We are looking at acquiring a mini excavator. That will be very useful to us in looking after some of our own roads projects, some of our own water projects, whereas we will not be so reliant on the services of external contractors to help us out in those urgent situations where we've got, say, a water main break or something. We do have a new request for an electric vehicle. This would be a vehicle available to staff from shared departments, both from engineering staff, planning staff, to go out and conduct site visits for permit applications, for building permit applications as well. We're seeking to fund those two equipment acquisitions through the equipment replacement fund. Community center completion, there are little pieces of the overall contract that is still to be completed. The retaining wall around the heat pump out front. We're looking at building a permanent fence around that heat pump to try and make it a little more aesthetically pleasing. We've got some snow fencing, some snow guards to install on the roof. And as well, there are still a few electrical and control deficiencies that need to be addressed by the contractor. So there are still $200,000 remaining in the project budget, and $200,000 of our growing community funds will be set aside to fund that. The library will be replacing carpet this year. I believe they've just started that project right now. We've got $25,000 in the budget to fund that, and that is coming from the capital renewal replacement reserve. We've got an interesting project this year being put forth. It's to resurface the tennis court at Bix. There are several community groups that are looking to fundraise additional monies in order to really improve and increase the scope of this project. BIM ourselves is committing $115,000 to this project, and we are proposing that these funds come from the Recreation Reserve. For parks, we have 3 trail stairways that are identified for renewal this year. There's one at Clipper Beach, one at Seymour Bay Beach, and one at Baker Beach. These are proposed to be paid for through the use of our Community Parks Reserve funds. Bike barn construction for $20,000. This is to be taking place out behind the community center, behind the fitness center there. The proposal is to construct a covered bike shelter, and we will be looking to use remaining climate action reserve funds in order to fund that. Trial bike park resurfacing is required this year in order to reshape it, rebuild it, make it safer. We're going to install some traction material on the ground bridge to improve safety there. Total cost of this project is $12,000, and we'll be funding it with Community Parks reserves. There's a $10,000 provision set aside in case any one of our pieces of fitness cardio equipment breaks down. There are only one type of each of those equipment. So any interference that we have with those pieces of equipment, they really reduce the ability or the use of the fitness center by people. So we want to make sure that we have the funds on hand to replace any one of those that shouldn't be met. The last one is a proposed service yard upgrade to get that project restarted. We believe now that the cost of this project through time delays, also through scope increases to the scope and design of it, will likely be in the neighborhood of about $6 million. Primarily, we would need to fund this through new debt. But staff are seeking to access $250,000 to fund design work, ongoing design work for this project. And that is proposed to come from the capital renewal replacement fund. Looking at our contributions to reserve funds for 2026, total budgeted reserve funds contributions, $3,237,965. Slightly lower than budget contributions last year, but one of those, that $77,000 not being contributed to the Community Works Fund, is because we have a purpose for it. We're going to use it to buy asset management software. As well, the cost to reserve funds are actually increased for those that are supported by property taxes. So our roads and infrastructure contribution is increasing, and our contribution to our recreation reserve also increasing, both supported by property taxes. So it does require an increase of $45,000 for property tax revenue in order to fund our reserves this year. Our non-statutory reserves, we've got a couple in there that we plan to set funding aside for. You see the $50,000 contribution to our civic facilities reserve. And also, I'd like to draw your attention to the $100,000 that we're putting aside for our police fund reserve contribution. We started at $50,000 3 years ago, and we're incrementally increasing that each year over the course of the planning period until when we anticipate we will need to start funding those police costs ourselves. We are very hopeful that our census this year does not take us over 5,000, but just and our plan is anticipating that by the time we get there, that we will have a cushion in a reserve fund in order to help mitigate the additional costs of that, and B, also that we've got taxation up to a level where the additional costs are then absorbed into the budget without too much change. Take a few moments to run through the utilities quickly. Of course, budget drivers in our utilities are always staffing. The 2026 budgets for each of the utilities now includes the full year impact of a full FTE position that was approved in the 2025 budget. As well, some changes coming up. We have a collective agreement with our union staff, which expired on December 31st. So we now will be looking later this year to negotiate a new agreement with them. Cove Bay, there are some significant costs faced only by Cove Bay, and it's relating to the operations and bringing online both modules of the water treatment plant. Some of the capital projects that are included in Cove Bay this year include $500,000 to upgrade the water main under Carter Road Bridge. We have a PRV replacement scheduled for Miller and Melmore Road at $150,000. And we have a PRV repair at Miller, right at Miller and Trunk Road, the main intersection there, for about $30,000. We are looking to recommend an expenditure of up to $150,000 to conduct a review of the water treatment plant and develop a plan to address sediment accumulation in the intake pipe from Grafton Lake, as well as conduct flushing of Grafton Lake. The rates for Cove Bay, yeah.
Did you say flushing of Grafton Lake?
Of the intake pipe.
Intake.
Yeah, sorry, I spoke too fast. I just will. The Cove Bay proposed rates for this year are estimated to increase by approximately 8%. The flat rate for each billing period will be going from 340 to 367. And then we are suggesting an 8% increase to the variable rates for each period. What that looks like effectively for an average property owner, looking at consumption of, say, a reasonable amount, let's say 137 gallons per day. The fees charged each 4 months, each 3 months are expected to be 380, increasing, overall increase for a billing period is approximately $30.20 at that rate, and the annual impact of that would look to the average homeowner consuming about 137 gallons per day would be approximately $90.60 over the course of the year. Cove Bay, I'm also suggesting, because of the significant number of capital projects planned for Cove Bay this year, I am suggesting that we that council considers implementing a new parcel tax of a flat $80 per property. This is because in 2026, the capital plans proposes utilizing $742,000 of reserves, drawing its reserve fund down from almost 900,000 down to 218,000. So with that significant budgeted utilization, we need to come up with a plan in order to begin to replenish those reserves. So this new parcel tax proposed will go to address that. For Snug Cove Sewer, we expect to have additional costs this year related to bringing online and utilizing a tertiary holding tank. The purpose of this is to reduce the outflow to make sure that Snug Cove Sewer does not go above its daily limit of outflow. I've added approximately $15,000 of additional costs to Snug Cove Sewer operating budget in order to allow for the additional costs related potentially to additional pump truck visits and additional hydro expenses that that can reasonably be expected to result from bringing this new tank online. Overall, the sewer budget revenue target figure has increased by 4% over last year. So the budget this year total to collect for sewer is $436,000. So the average increase that somebody could expect to experience, of course, assuming that their consumption remains stable from year to year, is approximately 4% year over year. The sewer capital outfall replacement project, originally proposed in 2022 at $1.2 million, is now coming back at $1.7 million. The costs that are driving this are additional permitting fees, additional consulting. There was never any construction consulting included in original project budget. As well, we need to undertake archaeological consulting, working on the seabed there. So those increased costs are going to be funded from a combination of sewer reserve funds and some internal borrowing from the general fund. And the plan includes that all internal borrowing will be fully repaid to the general fund by 2030. So that includes finally paying off the original loan, which was to complete the upgrade in 2022. And now this new additional loan will be repaid by 2030. The other major project in the sewer capital budget is the completion of the inflow and infiltration program. Its total is about $130,000 remaining to be spent on this project, and it is 100% grant funded through the Housing Accelerator Grant Program. This program focuses on data analysis and prioritizing repairs where we can minimize the added inflow and infiltration water, which uses up capacity of the existing sewer treatment plant. So the more that we can do to reduce this inflow and infiltration, we hope to create additional capacity on the other end. For Hood Point, we are recommending 4% increase to their user rates and parcel taxes this year. The user rate will be going to 993 from last year's 955, and recommend that the parcel tax go from 478 to 497 for connected properties, and 249 from 239 for unconnected properties. There has been a proposal to undertake a capital project in the Hood Point Water District, which is an expenditure of up to $250,000 this year, which will be to look at and present options and design treatment process options in order to address a problem that they have in their water, which is a significant amount of organic matter that results in elevated levels of disinfection byproducts appearing in their water, and they're in excess of the Canadian drinking water guidelines. So we need to spend some money in order to figure out what to do to address that issue. For the 3 Westside and Tunstall Bay water systems, they all have a uniform rate. We are adjusting the rate this year, the flat rate billed quarterly, from $340 to $350 per quarter, and looking at increasing the rates on a progressive scale, starting anywhere from 9% and going up to potentially 94%. Sounds like a lot, but what that looks like for the average homeowner, what we're trying to do is to shift the burden of rate increases onto those who are using at the higher end of the scale. We want to minimize the impact to cover water for essential daily needs, and we are implementing a progressively increasing rate scale. So for somebody who's using at say 100 gallons per day, the annual impact to that change can be expected to be about $74 per year. For parcel taxes on the west side, we've got no proposed parcel tax changes to Tunstall Bay or to King Edward Bay. Tunstall Bay will be increasing, will not be increasing. They're presently at $665 and $400 for unconnected properties. No changes to the parcel tax in King Edward Bay, which is $200 for connected and $120 for unconnected. We will be changing the Blue Water Park parcel tax as the project is coming to an end, and they're now in a place where they need to fund the full interest and principal balance of the borrowed funds. So we had an interim rate of parcel tax of $550 per year. So we'll be adjusting that to $1,200 per year, and that will fund the interest and principal payments on the loan. Some significant projects looking to begin on the west side. So being that they're groundwater wells systems, they're subject to GARP, which is groundwater at risk of pathogens. So for all the west side systems, Tunstall, Bowen Bay, King Edward Bay, and Blue Water Park, they do require installation of ultraviolet light treatment. The Tunstall Bay project is estimated to cost approximately $350,000, and it will be funded by their own reserve fund. On the west side, we will be funding that through the new shared West Side Reserve Fund. That project is estimated in total to cost approximately $275,000, and those upgrades are planned to take place in 2027. We need to save a little bit to get the money in the bank in order to go forward with those projects. 2026 other planned capital for the west side, we've got in Blue Water Park, we'll be completing the switchover of the Captain's Way connections and finalizing commissioning of the water main and well upgrade. We've got to get complete drawings from the consultants and things. So we still have up to $200,000 of unused, unaccessed authorized debt that we can use to pay for the remaining balance of this. And we'll just draw what we need in order to get it done. We do believe that the Captain's Way switchover is much smaller scale than what was initially thought. Tunstall Bay, other planned capital, we've got 80 meters of water main replacement to do along White Sails Drive, where there have been some significant leak events over the past couple of years. We believe that project will cost approximately $150,000. It's in the financial plan for 2027. However, we want to seek to coordinate this project with our pavement rehabilitation done in the same area. We're kind of waiting for that data assessment in order to make those decisions. Last one, Eagle Cliff Water System, adjusting their rates from 655 to 680 for the flat rate portion of their water bill this year. That's a 4% increase. And we are looking at increasing the tiered rates by ranging from 2 to 4%. Again, the same model. We are increasing the rates at the higher end of the scale, higher than we're increasing the rates at the bottom, because we want to shift that burden onto the higher users in order to encourage consumption, conservation. 2026 Eagle Cliff remaining project expenditures are estimated to be $1.4 million for the Eagle Cliff Cove Bay interconnection project. This project is 73% funded by grant funds and 27% is funded by BIM for the culvert portion and Eagle Cliff for the water main portion. Eagle Cliff users have approved up to $820,000 of borrowing to fund the Eagle Cliff portion of the project. There is a $500 parcel tax in place already in Eagle Cliff, and it will be unchanged for this year. However, once the project is complete and the final costs have been confirmed, and the ability for any of those in-between properties to connect has been determined, then we will look to establish a new parcel tax amount beginning in 2027. I do estimate that it will be in the range of $1,500 to $1,700 per year, and it will be in place for approximately 6 years. The estimated utility fund balance for the water systems, the closing balance in Cove Bay in 2026 will be $280,000. Hood Point, $746,000. Blue Water Park, $222,000. Tunstall Bay, $466,000. Eagle Cliff, $284,000. Bowen Bay, $253,000. King Edward Bay, $240,000. And Snug Cove Sewer, $130,000. I just would like to take this opportunity to announce the final steps of the financial plan adoption process. So later this week, we will have a budget open house Zoom meeting. I will essentially give a similar presentation to what I've just run through with council now. I will be available to answer the questions of the public, provide clarification or seek additional answers. March 9th, the next council meeting, I will come back to council with the results of that public feedback, as well as provide clear options for council to support or request be taken out or removed from the financial plan. I'll take that information and turn that around for the March 23rd council meeting, where I will come back with a draft financial plan bylaw and seek council's approval, 3 readings of that bylaw. The final meeting for April 13th will be the fourth and final reading and adoption of the financial plan. We do have until May 15th in order to get our financial plan adopted, so that is well in advance of that statutory deadline. And that's it for me. I'm happy to take questions.
Is that it? You're first. Councilor Morse, followed by Councilor Fast.
I've got a few questions. So for the museum and archives, There, you've got them in the grants is 33,950.
Yep.
And I think somewhere in there, you said there was you put another 30,000 in strategic projects or something.
No, that's one of the things I'm gonna come back on the 9th with an option for you.
Okay, because 33,950 isn't going to cut it for their operations or.
That's not what they've asked for yet.
But not anywhere near what they asked for.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'd like to explore the facilities revenue at some point, but as to why it's so much less than we budgeted, but we won't do that today. And I can't understand the Fire Smart grant. There's contradiction in what's written versus what was in the budget, so we'll do that later. So the roads infrastructure spending, and I can't remember which slide it was on, and I didn't write the numbers on, it's way lower for this year than it was for last year, and it is for next year.
It was 550 last year for roads
And it's
and,
1,900 something.
but there was $1 million set aside for culverts last year. So we are now looking at kind of harmonizing those. We're doing kind of equal half and half, splitting between culverts and roads. So the roads piece it started at 500, then went to 550, and it's up to 600 for this year, and it is projected to increase by 50,000 each year.
But it's 900 something next year.
The funding side of it is
No, I thought it
900.
was the expenditure.
No, it's 1.2 million expenditure, but we only need to fund 970 of it
I'm
because,
looking at the use of statutory reserve.
yeah, because the 230 is being funded by the Eagle Cliff grant.
And then in the list of capital projects, you've got all the master plans, like the water master plan and asset management plan. Why are those considered capital?
Because if they are resulting in a capital project, then you're allowed to capitalize them. In the end, that I'm gonna look at that and I'm gonna make the decision. If I think it's going to continue into more work, then I may continue to capitalize it. If I think it's a one and done, I would probably accept it.
Because I mean, the water master plan is gonna cover a whole bunch of different things.
Yeah.
Yeah, same with the asset management.
Yeah.
I can't see that they would be capital.
No, I typically like to put them in the capital budget though, because it doesn't create big spikes in expenditures from year to year in the operations budget. So for comparability, it's nice to kind of put them somewhere else.
Okay, and then you've got the new electric vehicle buried in a very funny description of $50,000 in 2027.
I think it's in 2026, no?
Oh, it's in 2027 column, I thought.
It should be in
And
2026.
it's talking about replacement in there too, which is sort of a little misleading. You know, I'm not supportive of the electric vehicle, so that's why.
Can we use more respectful language than misleading?
I'm saying this.
That is a fair comment. So there's a judgment on the intentions of the presenter and of staff, and that's not something that we did. So I understand it's been corrected. Thank you, Councillor Foster.
It is being funded from the equipment reserve, which is not a replacement reserve. It is used for acquisition of new. So
Yeah, but it is the description includes something vehicle and replacement. Anyhow.
Thank you. Back to the very beginning, when you were talking about revenue, in the grants, Housing Accelerator Grant was there. I just have been hearing on the news about housing grants being cut by the province, but I didn't hear you mention.
this is federal government funding.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah.
What I was hoping.
And they rushed to get it out the door before the last election, so I don't believe that there's any risk to that coming.
Thank you. I was just checking where it was coming
The
from.
risk is that we don't meet our housing targets. But I believe that we're on track for this year, so we're not concerned about it this year. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, discussions? I'm gonna go the first time speakers. I see Councillor Jurgensen with his hand up, followed by Councillor Saunders, and then Councillor Weiss. Were you Councillor Jurgensen?
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair to the CFO, there was an item that was that went up from 550 to 1200. As I understand it, because the users are now responsible for the full borrowing and interest, but I missed what the actual item was. Would it be possible to get you to shed
Yep.
some light on what that item was again?
It's the Blue Water parcel tax.
Okay.
So there was an interim parcel tax levied of 550, which would offset any of the interim interest payments that needed to be made while the construction loan was down. We've almost drawn down the full balance of that loan, so that's why it needs to go up now to 1,200, the full amount.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Saunders.
Thank you through the chair. Just two quick things. One is the bone waste contract.
Yeah.
It's gonna be coming, gonna be renegotiated. Is that gonna be renegotiated? Like, is there a competitor or is it?
Yeah,
Bone Waste?
we have to look at all.
Oh, we will, there will be other options.
Yep.
Okay, great. And then the other thing was, that the piling replacement, was $500,000 there for that. I'm just hoping we're not scheduling that for the summer.
Sorry.
The replacement, the piling
water main?
replacements. No, the
Pilings at the dock.
Oh, the
pilings at the
pilings.
dock.
There is a window that we're to work in.
I'm just thinking about ferry, obviously.
Yes, absolutely, it's going to be disruptive when that happens. Most of the work will be taking place on the water, and it's the dock, it's the wooden piling dock.
Right.
So it's not a dock that is used for transportation.
Is
so
BC
much.
Ferries involved in the planning or anything?
They
Like,
will
are they
have to
aware of
be
it?
because there's just so much
Yeah,
work going on
okay.
around there, but
As long as we've got some oversight.
yeah, but
Thank
there is a fishery window
Oh,
piece that is involved in
Okay.
it too, so it's not something that we can schedule at our leisure. There are to be some regulatory
right.
deadlines that apply to when we can do the work.
Thank you.
Back to you, Councilor Morse.
The fire protection reserve. Got the 900,000 from the sale in the opening balance because it's only 898,000.
Yeah, council decided to not put in the legal costs.
No, but I thought it was, so the actual fire department reserve was down to zero before that 900,000 calculation.
No, did I only have that?
You've only got 898,000 in the opening balance.
Yeah, because we bought the fire truck this year, we drew down most.
So we were actually
Yeah.
negative from.
No, we weren't negative, but these are all kind of estimates. I haven't really figured out where we've landed at year end for 2025 yet, but I think they're pretty close. Yeah, we did spend most of our fire reserve fund in 2025 to purchase the last fire truck. Yeah.
So any further questions or comments? I will look for the recommendations. Please.
I'll move as written.
The move by Councilor Jurgensen, second by Councilor Saunders. Any further discussion? Question.
Aye.
And that carries unanimously. Best of luck at the budget open house.
Thank you very much.
Have a full and packed house as we do every year. And just a note of appreciation for all of the pieces that have led up to this budget. And I think council's been well informed, I think the community's been well informed, and the timeline has been very clear, so thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to new business, 11.1, update the council on Metro Vancouver business. The only transacted committee meeting that's attached here is the governance committee at Metro Vancouver. They're currently at the outset of beginning to look at consultant recommendations as to the size and the composition of the board. I cannot anticipate that it would lead to any difference in Bowen's representation, but for those community, the larger communities like Vancouver and Surrey that have 5 or 6 representatives on the board, each holding 5 or 6 votes, there's a question of whether that's efficient use of resources. So I'm very curious to see. TransLink meeting is upcoming. It'll be the first meeting we've had of the year so far, so we haven't met since back in December. I'll report back on the outcome of that one. And I will hand it over to our Islands trustees at 11.3 for an update to council on Islands Trust business.
If council is sure they want to hear more about the Islands Trust, I can just say I'll just start with the Trust Council. Did have a committee, the whole about the budget, which you heard about last week. And then our next Trust Council meeting will be in Duncan, March 10, 11, and 12. And that'll be on Zoom as well, or anybody can, the agenda isn't posted yet, but it went to executive committee today or something like that. So the schedule, draft schedule is up. And we'll see what happens. I don't know. Anything to add?
No, but the, one of the things that came across my Facebook feed was that with all of the unrest in Mexico, that there might be an increase in FIFA this summer. And one of the things that we talked about at the last trust meeting when we had a joint meeting with our American counterparts was that we need to expect that there's going to be a huge increase in the number of visitors. And especially if there's problems with the States and there's problems with Mexico, that all the more reason why we're going to be inundated here in Canada. So I think it would be a really good idea to get in touch with either the people in the trust that are working with the American side, or us directly with the American side in terms of what they're expecting, because they were suggesting that there's going to be literally an inundation of people arriving by boat and wanting to see some of these events, and that it's typically the population that comes for these events is double or triple the impact that we have from the Olympics, that it's quite substantial. So if there's some ideas, some hints in terms of how we control that impact, I think that we should consider that and think about it. It's very late in the day, but things are changing, and Canada is going to be the safe haven. My prediction. In terms of ferry marshalling and all the rest of it.
Not seeing any further questions for our trustees. We'll move on to question periods. The question period is an opportunity for members of the public to request clarification or ask a follow-up question relating to an item of the meeting, not related to an item on the agenda, and must be there from there. Questions are limited to 2 questions per speaker, must not exceed 3 minutes total. For folks online or in the room, if they'd like to ask questions.
It's your chance, Keith.
Any? And with that, I will look for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councilor Wade, second by Councilor Saunders, all in favor, say aye.